Chapter 1276. Because of the soul-severing saber's ability to create seals, Lu Yi didn't have high requirements for the mountain pan saber. All he had to do was strengthen the quality and weight of the saber. This was a task that any master refiner could accomplish. It wasn't too difficult. Lu Yi even wanted to modify the saber himself. He had some attainments in the art of blacksmithing. After all, he had practiced blacksmithing with Master Kong Kong for several months in the sword tool sect's secret realm. He wasn't completely ignorant. However, he wasn't in a hurry. There was still some time before he could ascend to the constellation realm. After checking his other gains, the biggest one was the treasure gourd. It was the sword gourd's brother. The two gourds were placed together. From the outside, they looked about the same, but the color of the skin was slightly different. The sword gourd was green in color, and could be considered a green gourd. The skin of the second gourd was slightly red. The reincarnation tree's alpha origin realm opened once every 100 years. Spirit Sea realm geniuses from different realms could compete inside. However, the vine of fortune didn't appear every time. Only when the treasure gourd matured would the vine of fortune appear in front of the world. Since ancient times, the Alpha Origin realm had fought for the Spirit Sea realm countless times, but the Vine of Fortune had only appeared a few times. More than 10,000 years ago, someone from the 9 provinces sword tool sect obtained the sword gourd. Even longer ago, someone obtained a wind gourd. It was said that the wind gourd could blow out dark flames and gales. Any cultivator who touched it would die. It was now a top-tier realm's treasure. Perhaps there were other treasure gourds with similar effects hidden away. However, because it was too long ago and they were kept in secret, no one knew about them. I was curious as to whether the treasure gourd Ling Dan obtained had any miraculous effects. However, the environment in the Alpha Origin realm was right, so I didn't investigate. Now, I finally had the chance. The mouth of the gourd flashed, and Lu Yi was sucked into it. Then, the 8th group, the 7th group, seeing that I was busy, Big Four skipped over and stared at the gourd in my hand. Ling, what's that gourd for? It seems very powerful. Just look at the sword gourd and you would know. When I obtained the sword gourd, I was only in the true lake stage, but I was still able to activate the power of the sword gourd. Because of these patterns, each leaf emitted a powerful light, looking dazzling. For a moment, he didn't have a small head. Could it be that he was wrong? What did the gourd need to devour in order to produce its power? That was a headache for him. It seemed like he couldn't give it a try. Ling Dan's eyes were sharp and his hands were slow. He grabbed the dense light with his hand, but before he had time to examine it, another powerful light flashed from the mouth of the gourd, and the 7th cloud of dense light gushed out. Soon after, I took out another Lu Yi to try. I discovered that there were no exceptions. No matter what kind of tianan it was, the treasured gourd would still swallow it. Then the entire gourd was like a pai xiu, only retreating. He infused his spiritual power into the gourd, but there was no reaction. Artifacts were fine, spirit stones and spirit jades were fine, and spirit pills were fine. He casually picked up a bottle of healing pills, poured out a tianan pill, and placed it near the mouth of the gourd. Ling Dan's brows furrowed as he thought about the possibilities. Ling Dan suddenly noticed that the gourd in his hand was shaking. I quickly grasped it and used my divine sense to sense it. The first time was too sudden, so Ling Dan didn't have time to react. Thus, I took out another healing pill. This time I was very fast. As I placed the healing pill near the mouth of the gourd, Ling Dan also paid close attention to the changes in the gourd. Ling Dan suppressed his emotions and continued to try. Holding the gourd in his hand, he silently used his spiritual power to sense it. He could clearly feel that the gourd contained many mysterious patterns. Even with Ling Dan's current attainments in the Tao of Spirit Runes, he couldn't figure out the specific effects of these patterns. After 4 balls of light, the gourd returned to normal. What was that thing? Ling Dan wasn't angry at all. Yes, but its appearance was very good. It also exuded a light fragrance that made one feel refreshed. Even the annoyance from before had disappeared. This matter was very difficult to deal with because there was no precedent to follow. Everything had to be done by himself. If he could always spend a lot of effort to steal a gourd from under the noses of hundreds of cultivators, Wouldn't it just be a decoration? This was too much of a loss. I casually grabbed a medicinal ingredient that still had some mud on it and quickly placed it near the mouth of the gourd. Ling Dan was startled for a moment before he became happy. He turned his head to look at Big Four. He knew that the treasured gourd could swallow Big Four, but that was something he could try. If it really swallowed him, then the problem would be small. From his experience, the treasured gourd seemed to only swallow Tianan, and other things wouldn't cause it to react in any way. As if he could read my mind, Big Four hurriedly took a few steps forward. His body flickered, and he turned into light and disappeared. Ling Dan carefully observed the gourd and saw a powerful light flash from the mouth of the gourd. Then, a ball of light shot out from the mouth of the gourd. He picked up the gourd and squinted his eyes to look at it. He found traces of the healing pills that had been swallowed and shook them. There was no sound at all. The interior of the gourd seemed to be an empty space. The lu leaves had disappeared after being swallowed. I could faintly feel that there were some mysterious changes happening inside the gourd, but I couldn't tell what kind of changes were happening. Ling Dan only knew that all kinds of mysterious runes were appearing and disappearing inside the gourd. It was so slow that I didn't have time to check it out. I took another one to test it out, but it was the same. Even if I knew the effects of the lu leaves, Ling Dan could tell that the 4 Tianan pills were of the highest quality. As for whether or not they had any effects, that was up to me. I had to personally test it out. Tianan was just casually testing it out and didn't have any expectations. However, a miraculous scene occurred. The healing pill that he placed at the mouth of the gourd caused a reaction. Ling Dan had never seen the appearance of a lu leaf before. If the lu leaves I came into contact with in the future were mud balls, then these 4 weren't pearls. I had gathered many rare and precious medicinal ingredients during my trip to the Alpha Origin realm, and they were all rare and precious ingredients from the inner realms. I had originally planned to bring them back for 7th Senior Sister and Hua Ci to refine into pills. To medical cultivators, these ingredients were extremely precious. Now, they were all placed in front of me in a dazzling little pile. I was well versed in medicine, and those medicinal ingredients didn't have any special characteristics. Naturally, I knew what they could be used for. The result was just as I thought. The gourd's mouth flashed, and the herb was swallowed without a trace. It was a feeling, but Ling Dan firmly believed that feeling was wrong. But if that was the case, how could I test its effects? The sword gourd wasn't like this. It first swallowed treasures and gave birth to sword chi. Only then could it use the sword chi to kill enemies. Ling Dan was flustered. This situation lasted for a full incense stick of time before the trembling gourd suddenly stopped. The result was the same as before. The gourd's mouth flashed, and the healing pill was swallowed. Tianan didn't think much of it. The gourd couldn't swallow any kind of lu leaf, nor could it swallow any kind of medicinal herb. As such, he couldn't be sure that its effects were not related to medicinal herbs. However, he still needed to test it out. With that in mind, Ling Dan took out a trash magic tool and placed it near the gourd's mouth. Unexpectedly, there was no reaction. Now that the gourd had a reaction, was it because it had swallowed too little? Ling Dan was confused again. From the looks of it, the gourd's effects shouldn't be related to the lu leaf. At the very least, it could swallow the lu leaf. However, before swallowing the lu leaf, there was nothing else. Ling Dan tried to pour his spiritual power into the gourd to see if he could stimulate the gourd's power. However, his spiritual power was like a stone sinking into a small sea. There was no feedback. Ling Dan grumbled, "You know how powerful it is. In any case, it's quite infuriating." Ling Dan flipped the gourd upside down and shook it, but nothing fell out. Before the healing pill was swallowed, it was like a stone sinking into a small sea. It didn't even cause a ripple. What the hell? Since there was no sword gourd in his eyes, his gourd should have a way of swallowing treasures. At this moment, Tianan also knew what the mist from the gourd was. At first, Ling Dan thought that he had enough power. After all, the gourd was a natural treasure, so it was very difficult for him to activate it. The gourd should learn to swallow the lu leaf, but what about the medicinal herb? Ling Dan thought of the sword gourd's characteristics and guessed that this treasure was the same as the sword gourd. What did it need to swallow first? It was fine as long as there was no reaction. He was just afraid that it would react. Although I don't know much about natural supreme treasures like the vines of fortune, I do know one thing. These gourds that didn't come from the vines of fortune should all have the same effect. There should be 2 gourds with the same effect. Tian spent more than half a day and used up all of his spiritual power. After half a day, the gourd still didn't have any reaction. I was sure that the treasure's power was activated in this way. Otherwise, even if my cultivation was high enough, there wouldn't be any reaction. After making up his mind, Ling Dan took out the lu leaf and let the gourd swallow it. Then he took out a medicinal herb for the gourd to swallow. In any case, he had a small handful of medicinal herbs with Tianan, so there would be a problem if he didn't try. However, he was a bit discouraged. He took out a spirit stone to try, but there was still no effect. He took out a spirit jade, but the result was the same. Since it was activated in this way, how could it be activated? It wasn't until the gourd swallowed a dozen medicinal herbs that something strange happened. These were surprisingly lu leaves. However, they weren't the same as Tian's. The surface of each lu leaf was covered in patterns. They looked very mysterious and simple, as if they were naturally born. However, they also hid a profound truth. Chapter 1277. Lu Yi had no qualms about swallowing spirit pills. Not to mention the spirit pills that came out of the gourd, even if they were poison pills, he wouldn't care. With his talent tree burning, there was likely no poison in the world that could affect him. He casually took a spirit pill and threw it directly into his mouth. He gently chewed and a sound came from his mouth, as if something had broken, followed by a sweet taste rolling down his throat to his abdomen. It didn't feel like he was swallowing a spirit pill, but a berry full of sweet juice. The soft sound was the sound of the berry's skin breaking. This was the first time Lu Yi had experienced something like this. Since he started cultivating, he had swallowed a lot of spirit pills, especially spirit pills that could increase his cultivation. He only had one feeling, and that was that no spirit pill had a good taste. However, this spirit pill from the gourd gave him a different feeling. He was secretly surprised. As expected of a spirit pill from the gourd, the taste was different. He calmed his mind and experienced the effects of this spirit pill. A moment later, Lu Yi figured out the use of this spirit pill. This was a healing pill. However, he couldn't clearly distinguish whether the first batch of 4 Lu Yi was the same as the last 4. Only the size of the Lu Yi was the same. The most obvious difference was that the color was the same. In other words, even if it were other precious herbs, the Lu Yi produced by the gourd would have no impurities. This was the ability of the gourd itself. After silently feeling it for a moment, the spirit pill raised his eyebrows. The spirit pill calmed his mind. He hadn't had 2 successful experiences in the past. Although there seemed to be a general pattern in those 2 experiences, as long as he didn't try too much, he would be able to find the hidden rules. Before the same Lu Yi was swallowed, it shouldn't be strange for it to produce the same Sui. If he wanted to find a pattern in that kind of order, it would be very difficult, but since there was no precedent of success, as long as he didn't try too much, he wouldn't be able to find anything. The Sui after that was a healing pill, so what was the last one? After a while, the gourd trembled slightly again. Why would the treasured gourd give birth to 2 of the same Lu Yi in the same process? Could it be that it had nothing to do with the raw materials? The process of exploration was bumpy, but once he found the method, all the problems could be solved. What was the situation then? Therefore, if there were not enough Lu Yi, no matter who it was, their cultivation speed would increase by leaps and bounds. That would definitely cause a small impact and subversion to the existing cultivation methods in the cultivation world. In a short period of time, Ling Dan felt as if his entire body had become much heavier and slower, and there seemed to be even more vitality in his flesh and blood. Su Yi casually sized up the 4 newly produced continental leaves and found that they were the same as the previous 4. They were all dense and dazzling, and the surface of the continental leaves was covered with patterns, looking extremely mysterious. The lower the quality of the Lu Yi, the greater the reaction of the talent tree. It was not that the gray mist was thinner. The key question now was whether Su Yi could figure out how those Lu Yi were born. You were wondering why you couldn't concentrate recently. It turns out that there was a saying about not having a brain fog before the coronation. Very few people don't have similar side effects. For authors like you, that side effect isn't satisfying at all. Moreover, Ling Dan found a pattern. Once the gourd finished spitting out the Lu Yi, there would be more than 4. One was a small number, and one was a large number. This meant that the improvement that the Lu Yi could bring to a cultivator at my level was extremely significant. The efficiency of using the Lu Yi would be even slower than using stealing heaven's secrets. I recalled all my actions afterward. Whether I let the gourd swallow the Lu Yi or the herbs I collected from the Alpha origin, there seemed to be some pattern to it. But I definitely didn't have enough Lu Yi, so the efficiency of swallowing the Lu Yi would inevitably become the main method of cultivation. Although I had only experienced it twice, it was a hidden pattern of the gourd. Over the next few days, Ling Dan fought a battle of wits and courage with the gourd. During this time, I even sent a message to 7th senior sister to ask her about some things related to medicine. The visible furnace in his abdomen was still working. That was why it was known that the medicinal effects of a single leaf could only last for a short period of time before it was completely exhausted. What was commendable was that although the medicinal effects it contained were extremely small, it would be released very quickly in a cultivator's body. It would erupt all at once, giving the cultivator not enough time to absorb and refine it, causing the medicinal effects to be wasted. Moreover, the most worrisome thing was that refining required any interference, and the gourd couldn't complete the entire refining process by itself. The production of the healing pill would inevitably follow after it was swallowed by the gourd. It didn't matter if there were a dozen or so herbs. These herbs were all extremely precious and rare items harvested from the Alpha origin stage. The healing pills produced from such herbs before they were swallowed by the gourd would definitely be of extremely low quality and would naturally have extremely ordinary medicinal effects. As for whether there were any impurities, it should have something to do with the herbs. It should be the gourd's own ability. With a trace of curiosity, Ling Dan took out a Lu Yi and stuffed it into his mouth. Just like before, he chewed heavily. The Lu Yi was whole, and a sweet fragrance flowed down his throat to his abdomen. I finally know what the medicinal effect of the Su Yi was. It was the Lu Yi that could increase a cultivator's cultivation, but it wasn't used for cultivation. Moreover, the medicinal effect was amazing and long-lasting. With such thoughts in mind, Ling Dan had the gourd swallow the Lu Yi and various other herbs. Ling Dan decided to call it a pill gourd. That was something that had never happened before. Every Su Yi had no impurities. When the Lu Yi entered the stomach, the useless things would be absorbed and refined by the body, displaying the medicinal effect it shouldn't have. The impurities would be burned clean by the talent tree, turning into gray mist and dissipating. Moreover, Ling Dan knew what these herbs were and randomly chose them. Sure enough, a moment ago, a faint light flashed from the mouth of the gourd, and a dense light was spat out. It was only in front of 4 balls of light that the gourd calmed down again. However, when he swallowed the healing pill, the effects of the medicine kicked in, and the accumulated internal injuries were quickly healed. The effect of that healing pill could almost be described with words, but its effect on the injuries hadn't even reached its peak. What kind of matter was that? It had to be known that no matter how low a pill refiner's skills were, the Lu Yi they refined might have the slightest bit of impurities. That wasn't something that could be done by human means. Su Yi knew that the gourd was about to spit out the Lu Yi again. He immediately held his breath and concentrated, sensing the changes inside the gourd while waiting. But that time, there wasn't the slightest bit of gray mist under the talent tree. That meant that the healing pill that came out of the gourd didn't have the slightest bit of impurities that weren't harmful to him. Because after the medicinal effect was dissolved, some of the accumulated internal injuries in his body showed signs of being greatly relieved, and a comfortable feeling spread throughout his body. Ling Dan didn't take it too seriously, because those minor impurities didn't have any practical effect on his strength. It could even be said that he could feel it on a daily basis. He didn't prepare the superior Ling Dan and nervously put it away. Then came the 7th, the 8th. It wasn't something that could be used to refine pills, but by borrowing its power, even if one didn't know anything about medicine, as long as they grasped the rules, they could still refine extremely low-quality Lu Yi without any impurities. Before those injuries healed, they didn't have any impurities. A long time ago, Wuxia told me that if I didn't have the chance, I had to find a medical practitioner to treat my injuries frequently. Only then would I be able to get rid of the impurities in my body. What was even more frightening was that the Lu Yi didn't have the slightest bit of impurities, and no one could refine and absorb it daily. But that Lu Yi continued to show its effects for more than 10 breaths. After 10 breaths of time, his stomach was still warm, as if there was a large furnace missing from his stomach. The most important thing was that the spirit pill could sense that as the medicinal efficacies spread, his foundation was rapidly growing. And that kind of healing pill, before I swallowed one, I didn't even have 4 of them. If that thing was used at a critical point, it could save my life or even save my life. But no matter how bad its quality was, it still had no impurities, which was reflected under the talent tree, and not the gray mist produced before it was burned. There was definitely no process involved. If I could figure out the process, Lingdan felt that I would be able to replicate the effects of the lake treasure gourd. Su Yi had collected a lot of herbs from the alpha origin stage, but there were very few types of herbs. The herbs thrown into the gourd were naturally the same as the ones thrown into the lake treasure gourd. In terms of abnormalities, the process of swallowing Lu Yi was like this. A Lu Yi entered my stomach, refined, and absorbed, and turned into my foundation. The entire process lasted for more than 10 breaths, because each Lu Yi's every effect was limitless. There was no limit to how much improvement each leaf could bring to the body, so the feeling was very obvious. It had to be accumulated to a certain extent before Han who could sense it. Up until now, the quality of the Lu Yi pills I had consumed were all of inferior quality. This was because I had been lacking in merits and battle merits since a long time ago. Su Yi's things couldn't be bought casually from the Tianji treasury, so it was only natural for me to pick up the inferior ones. As a weapon cultivator, he often had to engage in close combat with the enemy. Injuries in battle were unavoidable. Lu Yi had been cultivating for so long, and he had suffered many injuries. There was a period of time when his body was covered in wounds after he took off his clothes. It was a shocking sight. Lingdan also realized that the lake treasure gourd he had obtained in the alpha origin stage didn't have such a miraculous ability. It was like the sword gourd, which could devour treasures to derive sword chi and kill enemies. It was also like the legendary wind gourd, which contained underworld flames and astral winds, but its power was limited. For Lingdan, stealing heaven's secrets was the slowest cultivation method, because the talent tree couldn't devour pure spirit chi as much as it wanted and turn it into its foundation. Swallowing Lu Yi and spirit stones was only a supplementary method. What surprised Su even more was that the talent tree didn't react at all before he swallowed the healing pill. After persistent efforts and fumbling, Lingdan finally found the correct way to use the lake treasure gourd and knew what kind of effects it could display. Chapter 1278. Alchemy was an extremely rigorous process. A mature alchemist would often need to start learning how to differentiate between medicinal ingredients. It would take years or even decades of accumulation, as well as the experience of finding success from repeated failures. Only then would it be possible to refine a spirit pill. And if a sect wanted to cultivate a qualified alchemist, they would need to invest a lot in the early stages. For example, those small sects and clans simply did not have the strength and foundation to cultivate their own alchemists, because the cost of accumulating alchemy was not something they could afford. The total number of medical practitioners in the 9 prefectures was actually quite large. These medical practitioners were all proficient in medicine and knew how to treat people better. However, not all medical cultivators could refine elixirs. Those who could refine elixirs only accounted for a very small portion of the total, not even 10% of the total. Even with this 10%, there were still differences in the skill of refining elixirs, and they could not be lumped together. But there was such a magical treasure in this world. Even if one did not understand medicine, as long as they understood the rules, they could refine a treasure pill that left even the most brilliant alchemist in the dust. Pill gourd. Lu Yi decided to call this treasure gourd from the alpha origin stage pill gourd. This name perfectly matched its characteristics. In truth, he did not understand why pill gourd had such a magical ability, but since it was a natural treasure, it was reasonable for it to have some peculiarities that ordinary people could not understand. Just like the sword gourd's ability to devour treasures and derive sword chi, this was the sword gourd's ability. The user did not need to understand the principle, and only needed to make use of it. Originally, Pill Gourd had no plans to return to Ao Mountain, but before he understood the effects of the spirit pill, he still had to make a trip back. He found a Tianji business alliance nearby and used the Tianji pillar to teleport back to the Jade Blood sect's main sect. That was a special place given to me by Deci. In the entire 4 prefectures, only Pill Gourd could use the Tianji pillar to teleport anywhere. No one else had the authority to do so. The main reason was that Deci had always been in the shadows, and the only person in the 4 prefectures who knew Deci's background was Niu Ho. Shui Yuan had been in charge of the Jade Blood sect for many years and was responsible for the development of the main sect. Therefore, it only took a moment for her to realize the great and small role that Yang Qing would play in the future. Moreover, even if I really wanted to use Niu Ho, I couldn't directly buy it from the Tianji treasury. Without the talent tree, I was not afraid of a mere pill poison. After that, he didn't see Niu Ho, only Niu Ho didn't leave. Shui Yuan took the pill and casually sized it up. Although she could sense the profoundness of the pill and that it was ordinary, she didn't know exactly what it was. Even so, the medicinal effect of the Origin Spirit pill was extremely rich. It was definitely not something a special Origin Spirit pill could not compare to. The difference between the two was at most several times. If one didn't experience it for themselves, it would be hard to believe that such a low-quality cloud spirit pill didn't exist in this world. You always felt that when that Yang Qing pill entered your stomach, it slowly turned into a violent medicinal efficacy that increased your foundation. What was most rare was that you didn't feel the slightest bit of impurities from it. Yang Qing was also an essence spirit pill, but it didn't have any pill poison. Moreover, its medicinal efficacy was several times that of a special essence spirit pill. Such a Yang Qing couldn't even be called a divine object. He looked at Niu Ho in confusion. What is the use of this treasure? My main method of cultivation is still stealing heaven's secrets. This kind of cultivation efficiency is not enough. I need to consume Yang Qing, which is produced in addition to Ling Dan, to improve even less. Just this point alone, once the existence of the Yang Qing was leaked, it would definitely be sought after by all the cultivators. Dan Gourd hurriedly stuffed all the ingredients needed to refine the Origin Spirit pill into the Spirit Retreat pill. Yang Qing was of the highest grade, which was needed by Spirit Stream stage cultivators. Next was the Cloud Spirit pill, which was needed by Cloud River stage cultivators. As for the Origin Spirit pill, it was needed by True Lake stage and Spirit Ocean stage cultivators. The ingredients used to refine it were the same, and the medicinal efficacy was also the same. Hence, Ling Dan was of little use to me. Since that was the case, Shui Yuan would take care of it and use it to promote the development of the sect's overall strength. It would be less useful than keeping it by my side. A heavy pop came from her mouth. Shui Yuan closed her eyes and quietly felt it. The expression on her face was constantly changing. When Shui Yuan was demonstrating, the ingredients used were all bought from the Heaven's Secrets treasure house. They were all ingredients that could be easily found in the 4 prefectures. However, the quality of the Yang Qing produced was also beyond imagination. This was definitely not something that could be produced by humans. Dan Gourd gave you a thumbs up. 7th senior sister's eyes are as sharp as torches. Junior brother, you really did get something bad. You took out the Ling Dan as if you were presenting a treasure. Although you don't have Dan Gourd's innate skill tree, with your cultivation and strength, especially as an outstanding Yang Qing, you can still vaguely sense the impurities in a single Yang Qing. However, Shui Yuan had never thought that there would be a Yang Qing without any pill toxins in the world. Furthermore, it was not born right under your nose. Then, she added the ingredients needed to refine the Yang Qing into the Ling Dan. When the quantity and quantity of ingredients was sufficient, she only needed to wait quietly. The Ling Dan would automatically refine a Yang Qing of extremely low quality and spit it out. Dan Gourd's leader said, "Senior sister can try the medicinal efficacy." Shui Yuan looked at the yang qing in her hand, as if she had seen something she liked. She did not want to part with it, but thinking that Dan Gord did not have 4 yang qing, she steeled her heart and stuffed it into her mouth. I found 7th senior sister Shui Yuan under the upright guard peak. After a complicated conversation, 7th senior sister brought me to a secret room. Therefore, when she saw Niu Ho take out the ingredients needed to refine the origin spirit pill, she could not help but be curious. Could it be that Dan Gord wanted to refine the pill himself? If that was the case, what was the gourd for? It would be an exaggeration to call such a thing a pearl. At first glance, it looked completely unrelated to yang qing. Even though Shui Yuan had not been in contact with the Tao of alchemy for very long and had personally refined many medicinal pills, she had never seen such a bizarre scene. Therefore, when cultivators cultivated, borrowing yang qing was only a supplementary method. No one would take it in small quantities. If that was the case, they would have to spend time to neutralize the pill toxins beforehand. The gains were more than the losses. In just a short moment, a powerful light flashed from the mouth of the gourd, followed by a ball of dense smoke. In fact, the process of Niu Ho refining yang qing was very complicated. First, he did not need to let the Ling Dan swallow a yang qing. That could be considered a primer. Dan Gord said, "You call it a Ling Dan. It was obtained by chance when you went to a place called the Reincarnation Tree with a junior pill refiner. Originally, you also knew that it did not have any effect. It was only recently that you figured it out. As for why it can be refined into Niu Ho, this thing is an innate supreme treasure. That is its own ability. The mechanism behind it can be studied. You only know how to use it. Come, senior sister, teach him how to use it." Dan Gord smiled and opened the bottle, taking out a yang qing from it. It was none other than the origin spirit pill. Handing the Ling Dan to Shui Yuan for safekeeping was Dan Gord's decision. The quality of a yang qing depended entirely on how much pill toxins it contained. This was also the ultimate pursuit of Lu Yi when refining pills. Lu Yi, who had inferior skills, could refine a yang qing with more pill toxins. Naturally, it was more sought after. No Niu Ho had any impurities. This was something that was not harmful to cultivators and could not be called pill toxins. After consuming yang qing for a long time, the pill toxins in the cultivator's body would accumulate. It would take time and effort to neutralize them. Of course, the quality of the yang qing produced by the Ling Dan had nothing to do with the quality of the ingredients used. Shui Yuan's attainments in the pill Tao were very high. In addition, Niu Ho specially sent a message to you 2 days ago to ask for some advice. Thus, when she saw the ingredients, she understood. These are the ingredients for refining the origin spirit pill? In the 4 continents, there were 8 types of yang qing required for cultivation. They were yang qing, cloud spirit pill and origin spirit pill. Following which, under Shui Yuan's gaze, Dan Gord sent the origin spirit pill to the mouth of the Ling Dan. A powerful light flashed and the Ling Dan swallowed the origin spirit pill. Before Niu Ho advanced to the true lake stage, the yang qing he consumed was not the origin spirit pill. When cultivating or fighting, Ling Dan was often stuffed into one's mouth like fried beans. The reason why the healing pills and yang qing pills refined from the pill gourd weren't of such low quality wasn't because the herbs I added were all from the alpha origin stage. These herbs were rare and precious, and the yang qing pills refined from those herbs were naturally of lower quality. Dan Gord took the Ling Dan from you and took out a bottle of yang qing and some ingredients that he had prepared beforehand from his storage bag. He said, "Senior sister, look at these ingredients. Do you have any thoughts? What do you think?" Before the ingredients were placed into the Ling Dan suddenly vibrated heavily. Shui Yuan did not ask any questions and only waited silently. "Senior brother, what kind of treasure is that gourd? Why can it refine such yang qing?" Shui Yuan opened her eyes and asked. She raised 2 fingers and pinched a yang qing from Dan Gord's palm. She carelessly observed the mysterious patterns on the surface of the yang qing. Then, she placed it at the tip of her nose and sniffed it. She looked at Dan Gord in shock. "Is that Niu Ho Jun?" Shui Yuan took the lead and listened attentively. The most direct point was that if the sect did not have enough yang qing, the disciples' cultivation speed would increase by an unimaginable amount. The time needed to grow was also much shorter than other cultivators. Seeing my secretive appearance, Shui Yuan couldn't help but laugh. Then what kind of bad thing did you get? Dan Gord had no experience and hurriedly put it away. He put it away 4 times in a row before handing it to Shui Yuan. Senior sister, please take a look. The Origin Spirit Pill was the lowest grade and the most preferred to refine. Even if Shui Yuan personally refined it, she could only guarantee a 10% success rate. Ling Dan was similar to the Sword Gourd and the Wind Gourd. It could be used by cultivators to fight with enemies and gave them the power to attack. Ling Dan's nature was more of a support type, but it was precisely this nature that was needed by a newly developing sect like the Blue Blood sect. Shui Yuan was stunned. She looked over and saw Dan Gord's palm. 4 dazzling treasure pills were arranged in a disorderly manner, each one blooming with light. Chapter 1279. After handing the pill gourd to Shui Yuan, Lu Yi left Principal Guarding Peak and headed straight for Green Bamboo Peak. In mid-air, he encountered many junior brothers and sisters who were flying around. After sensing his aura, they all stopped and bowed. Ao Mountain was gradually becoming more lively now, because the cultivation of the disciples recruited in the past had gradually increased. It was unlike the first few years when Lu Yi had just entered the sect. Every time he returned to Ao Mountain, there would only be a few big cats and small cats, making it seem empty. The current Jade Blood sect truly had the aura of a sect. The new generation of disciples was endless, and the cultivation of the disciples recruited in the past rose steadily. Only by passing on the torch and carrying on the past and opening up the future could a sect flourish. Lu Yi met a few familiar faces. They were the first batch of disciples to join the Jade Blood sect, and most of them were now at the Cloud River tier. Compared to his cultivation speed, these people's cultivation speed was very slow, but this was actually the normal cultivation speed of a cultivator. Not to mention Lu Yi himself, even Hua Ci, Zhu Jia, and the others were all extremely talented people. Coupled with enough battle achievements and merits, they were able to leave ordinary people in the dust in terms of cultivation speed. The current Jade Blood sect was thriving as a whole, but it was still lacking in high-end battle strength. This was not a problem that could be solved in a short period of time. It could only be left for the future, when a steady stream of disciples reached the true Lake tier and Divine Sea tier. Only then would the situation improve. This might have to wait for 10 or 20 years. The Emerald Bamboo Peak was still quiet. As the peak master of the Emerald Bamboo Peak, Lu Yi had absolute jurisdiction and authority over his own spirit peak. If other disciples wanted to settle down in the Emerald Bamboo Peak, they had to report to him first and obtain his permission. However, Lu Yi was not in the sect all year round, so even if disciples wanted to build their own cave in Green Bamboo Peak, they would not be able to ask for permission. Anyway, there were so many spirit peaks in Ao Mountain, and it was not like they had to target Green Bamboo Peak. Those disciples who were qualified to build their own cave in the sect mostly chose other spirit peaks. Arriving at Green Bamboo Peak, Lu Yi scanned with his divine sense. He was surprised because he did not sense Yi and Hu Po's auras. Previously, he had found it very strange because he had a pet contract with Hu Po. Later on, he had even formed a life origin technique and a beast mark technique. As long as they were not too far away from each other, they would be able to sense each other. However, after returning to the sect, he did not sense Hu Po's existence. He tried to send a message, but it also failed. In such a situation, there was only one possibility. Yi and Hu Po were not in the 9 prefectures. Since they were not in the 9 prefectures, there was only one place to go. They were in the Wushuang continent. Perhaps it was because cultivation was boring, or perhaps it was because he needed battle merits, so he went to the Wushuang continent to train himself. This was also the correct way to cultivate. Blindly cultivating in seclusion was not advisable. It was easy to have an unstable foundation, and it would cause unpredictable effects in the future. Take Lu Yi, for example. If he had only focused on improving his cultivation, he could have broken through to the star constellation realm long ago, but in fact, he was only an 8th order Divine Sea realm cultivator. This was the result of him deliberately suppressing the speed of his cultivation. When it was time to cultivate, he would cultivate. When it was time to stabilize his foundation, he would stabilize his foundation. Only then would he be able to go further in the future. There was no one on the verdant bamboo peak. Lu Yi walked into the bamboo building that he had built before, cleaned up a little, and sat down cross-legged. During the 3 months of fighting in the Alpha Origin realm, Yang Kai had witnessed the monstrous geniuses of various races and territories. Not only had his horizons been broadened, but he had also stabilized his 8th order cultivation. Now that the 9 prefectures were connected to the starry sky, star constellation realm cultivators were emerging one after another, and they had embarked on the path of exploring the starry sky. Lu Yi felt that it was time for him to take a step forward. The goal of this retreat was to break through to the 9th order divine sea realm. This was not difficult for him, it was just a matter of time. Before coming to the verdant bamboo peak, he had already exchanged enough golden spirit sticks. At this time, he took out a golden spirit stick and crushed it. A golden vortex immediately appeared in front of him. The roots of the talent tree extended in and wantonly devoured. At the same time, he calmed his mind and looked at the talent tree. There were now a lot of burning leaves on the talent tree. There were dozens of spirit inscriptions on those leaves alone. Almost every one of these spirit inscriptions had played an indelible role in Lu Ye's growth and battles. As his cultivation improved, as the spirit inscriptions on the leaves of the talent tree continued to be developed, there were no new spirit inscriptions on the talent tree. However, he could inscribe any spirit inscriptions he wanted on those newly burned leaves. The void spirit inscriptions were his biggest and only achievement at this stage. With the help of this void spirit inscriptions, Lu Yi could often appear and disappear unpredictably when fighting in the Alpha Origin realm, catching his enemies off guard. Especially when fighting against Dharma cultivators, with the help of the void spirit inscriptions, it was easy to achieve close combat. The void spirit inscriptions had benefited Lu Yi a lot. Of course, he wanted to inscribe more spirit inscriptions. The battles with the monstrous geniuses in the Alpha Origin realm made Lu Yi realize some of his shortcomings. It was because the mountain coiling saber had not paid attention to its sharpness in the process of upgrading several times. Therefore, at this stage, its lethality was not enough when fighting with enemies. In the past, Lu Yi could add sharpness spirit inscriptions to the mountain coiling saber to increase its lethality to make up for this shortcoming. If one sharpness spirit inscriptions didn't work, then he would add dual sharpness spirit inscriptions. However, as his cultivation continued to improve, the enemies he encountered became stronger and stronger, and the lethality of the sharpness spirit inscriptions became somewhat insufficient. If it was already like this at this stage, it was needless to say when he reached the constellation realm. This was because in the upper 3 realms, the focus of a cultivator's cultivation was essence, chi, and spirit. The constellation realm corresponded to the path of essence. When one's essence and chi were abundant, one's physical defense would be strong. Therefore, when facing enemies, one would need to use sharp slashes. If one couldn't even break through the enemy's physical defense, then no matter how exquisite one's combat skills were, it would be useless. There were only 2 ways to change this. One was to increase the sharpness of the mountain coiling saber. However, this kind of increase would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. As a Dharma armament cultivator, every battle required close combat with the enemy, and every slash required full strength. Once the mountain coiling saber became sharper, it would be easier for it to break. In this way, it would need to be carefully repaired after a few battles, which was very troublesome. Take the battle with Bai Shi as an example. After that battle, there were many small cracks on the mountain coiling saber, which directly affected the power of the mountain coiling saber. Therefore, it wasn't advisable to simply make the mountain coiling saber sharper. All this time, the mountain coiling saber had never had sharpness as its characteristic. Lu Ye's several upgrades were all focused on its sturdiness. Only when it was sturdy enough would it be easier for him to use his full strength and not have to worry about the saber breaking in battle, which would affect his strength. This was the biggest advantage of the mountain coiling saber, and Lu Yi didn't plan to change this characteristic. Then there was only the second path left, which was to think of a solution with spirit runes. After the second transformation of the talent tree and the ability to deduce spiritual tattoos, Lu Yi had a vague idea: to deduce a new sharpness spiritual tattoo so that it would have a better effect than the original sharpness spiritual tattoo. However, at that time, because he had to deduce the void spirit rune, he couldn't multitask. Moreover, this idea was too vague, and Lu Yi didn't know how to put it into action until he came into contact with the fairy race in the fairy tree realm. The fairy's blessing gave him hope. In the end, the blessing that Lu Yingying gave him was no different from a spirit rune. They both increased the lethality of the mountain coiling saber, allowing him to be invincible in the battle against the Zergs. However, Lu Yingying's blessing was much better than the sharpness spirit rune in terms of effect. The reason why Lu Yi came up with the idea of stealing Lu Yingying and Hong Dandan was not because he was greedy for them. He just wanted to bring them back to study their blessings. It would be best if he could complete the idea of deducing the new sharpness spiritual inscriptions through their blessings. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed in the end. Before he left, he was stopped by the reincarnation tree. The two fairies were exchanged for a leaf from the reincarnation tree. He didn't know if it was a loss or a gain. In any case, he didn't bring the fairies back. However, Lu Yi still had the experience of being blessed with a blessing. At that time, he wanted to feel the power of the blessing and had some vague ideas in his heart. Now, it was up to him to see if he had the ability to turn these ideas into reality. This was undoubtedly a very difficult thing to do because the process needed to be deduced based on the result. The result was that the mountain coiling saber became even sharper under the blessing of the blessing. Lu Yi had to deduce a new spirit rune based on the sharpness spirit rune to achieve the same effect as the blessing of the blessing. This required constant trial and error. Fortunately, Lu Yi had enough time now. During the cultivation process, he didn't need to spend much effort. He only needed to activate the talent tree's power to devour pure spiritual energy. Therefore, this kind of deduction wouldn't delay his cultivation. Immersing himself in his thoughts, the yin and yang energies on the newly burning leaf on the talent tree began to change and connect. They gradually covered a leaf and then spread to the next leaf. Because the original sharpness spirit rune was used as the basis for deduction, this process was traceable and not completely based on imagination. The deduction of the talent tree was extremely magical. As soon as Lu Yi started to deduce, he was completely immersed in it and completely forgot his environment. He didn't realize that he was still in the state of cultivation at all. All his energy and mind were devoted to it. In this state, many wonderful ideas constantly emerged in his mind and turned into yin and yang energies. All kinds of knowledge about the way of spiritual tattoos that he had learned in the past were constantly colliding in his mind and arousing new sparks. This was a deduction that allowed him to review the old and learn the new. It was also a summary of what he had learned. Although he was completely immersed in it, Lu Yi could still faintly feel that if this idea was successful, his attainments in the way of spiritual tattoos would definitely be greatly improved. Chapter 1280. While cultivating and deducing spirit veins, Lu Yi completely lost his perception of the passage of time. His mind was filled with the various combinations of yin and yang. He even forgot to use the golden spirit stick. But his cultivation did not stop. He didn't know how long this state lasted until Lu Yi suddenly felt that the spirit energy in his body was surging much faster than usual. At the same time, it seemed that an invisible shackle had been broken. Only then did he come back to his senses. His qi was boiling, his spirit energy and vitality surging together, and an invisible aura spread out. His whole body felt an indescribable comfort from the inside out. The ninth order divine sea realm. This was a bottleneck that had troubled countless generations of cultivators in the 9 states. It was also the highest level that cultivators in the 9 states could reach in the past 10,000 years. Generations of cultivators had been stuck at this point, unable to move forward. It was unknown how many heroes had chosen to enter secluded retreat in order to seek the opportunity to break through. But in the end, it all ended in failure. Before this generation, no one knew that a cultivator's cultivation realm was actually related to the level of the world. If the level of the world was not high enough, no matter how monstrous one's aptitude was, no matter how much they cultivated in secluded retreat, they would not be able to glimpse the dawn of a breakthrough. Compared to the ancestors of the 9 states in the past, the cultivators of this generation were extremely lucky. They just happened to catch up with the upgrade of the 9 states world. This generation and the elite cultivators in the future no longer had to worry about being stuck at the Divine Sea realm. But this was an opportunity, and at the same time, a risk. With the connection to the starry sky, it was no longer possible for the 9 states to survive silently as before. Perhaps one day, the 9 states would usher in new enemies and new crises. This required the current cultivators of the 9 states to work hard in cultivation. Only by constantly improving their strength could they be qualified to protect their homeland and home in the future. For cultivators like Lu Yi, the 9th Order Divine Sea realm was just another new realm. Only when one's cultivation reached this level would it be possible to enter the starry sky. It was just a possibility. Although there was no precedent of a 9th Order Divine Sea realm cultivator failing to ascend to the Star Mansion realm so far, that was because all the cultivators in the 9 provinces who had ascended to the Star Mansion realm had spent a great deal of time in the 9th Order Divine Sea realm. With this accumulation, the success rate of ascension was naturally extremely high. Moreover, in the previous environment of the 9 provinces, those who could cultivate to the 9th Order Divine Sea realm were all outstanding talents. Such elite cultivators only lacked an opportunity to soar. The upgrade of the 9 provinces world gave them such an opportunity, and they could take advantage of it. However, advancing from the Divine Sea realm to the Constellation realm was still a huge leap in cultivation. It was impossible to have a 100% success rate. Just like in the past, there was always a risk of failure when advancing to the next realm. Before the True Lake realm, it was still okay. As long as one had enough accumulation, the success rate would not be low. However, advancing from the True Lake realm to the Divine Sea realm was a huge obstacle for many cultivators. It could be foreseen that in the future, with the changes in the cultivation environment of the 9 regions, it would become easier and easier for cultivators to advance to the Divine Sea realm. However, correspondingly, the advancement of the Divine Sea realm to the Constellation realm would inevitably fail. Ordinary cultivators would not feel much when advancing from the 8th Order Divine Sea realm to the 9th Order. It was nothing more than an improvement in their foundation and strength. However, after Lu Yi advanced to the 9th Order Divine Sea realm, he could clearly feel a mysterious power begin to take effect in his body. It was nourishing every inch of his flesh and blood at an extremely gentle speed, causing his flesh and blood to glow with a stronger vitality. It even made his entire body feel warm and comfortable. After a brief perception, Lu Yi knew what kind of power was at work. It was the reward for winning the First Order Divine Sea realm. This power had been hidden in his flesh and blood all this time. Lu Yi thought that this power would only begin to take effect when he advanced to the Constellation realm. He never thought that it would have already begun. This was undoubtedly better, because from the 9th Order Divine Sea realm to the Star Constellation realm, it would take a period of time to accumulate. During this time, the subtle influence of this mysterious power would definitely play a better role. He understood that when this gentle power fully integrated into his flesh and blood, it would be the best time for him to advance to the Constellation realm. This process might take some time. Turning his head, he looked at the rabbit-like little 9 and said, "Thanks." During this period of time, he had been immersed in the process of deducing spirit runes and had completely forgotten to crush the golden spirit lot to maintain his cultivation. However, his cultivation had not been interrupted. The main reason was that little 9 had come over at some point. Every time the time limit of a golden spirit lot was almost up, little 9 would crush a new one for Lu Yi, allowing him to maintain his cultivation state. If not for this, Lu Yi's cultivation would not have been affected too much. However, being interrupted in the process of deducing would undoubtedly be very troublesome. Little 9 opened his eyes and glanced at him, but did not say anything. He had a proud look on his face that said, "What would you do without me?" Lu Yi got up and walked out of the bamboo house, slowly pulling out the mountain coiling saber from his waist. With a thought, the sharpness spirit rune on the mountain coiling saber activated. However, this time, it was not the original sharpness spirit rune, but the one he had deduced recently. After such a long period of deduction, there were still some results. The moment the new sharpness spirit rune activated, a faint light flashed on the pitch-black mountain coiling saber, faintly emitting a feeling of sharpness. Lu Yi brandished the saber and slowly danced. It was just like the scene of him practicing the saber when his cultivation was low. Every movement was meticulous. On the green bamboo peak, as the figure moved, the sound of the saber cutting through the air was endless. Only after a long time did Lu Yi slowly withdraw his saber, his brows tightly knitted. Although he did not have the chance to have a real battle with a strong enemy to test the results of his deduction, Lu Yi could still feel that the new sharpness spirit rune he deduced this time was not satisfactory. In comparison, the new sharpness spirit rune's effect was indeed better than the original sharpness spirit rune, but it had not reached the expected level. Not to mention, it could not be compared to Zhu Yan, who was blessed by green luster. Such a spirit rune, in a real life and death battle, could bring him limited improvement. If he really reached the constellation realm, relying on such results to kill the enemy, he might have to spend a lot of effort. As expected, it was not so easy to deduce a new spirit rune. Previously, Lu Yi was able to deduce the void spirit rune smoothly because he had learned the complete void spirit rune from a book. His deduction of the void spirit rune was just a refinement of some details on the original foundation, which was not a subversive result. But now, it was not so simple when it came to the sharpness spirit rune. It meant that he had to deduce a complete new spirit rune. Even if he used the original sharpness spirit rune as the basis for deduction, it was still very difficult. Lu Yi felt that even if he continued to deduce it, he would not make much progress. Fundamentally, although he had some achievements in the way of spirit runes, he was still young and had not spent enough time on the way of spirit runes over the years. He spent more time in the process of cultivation and improving his fighting skills. He had always regarded the way of spirit runes as an auxiliary. It seemed that he relied too much on the talent tree. Because he could use the spirit runes on the talent tree at will, he lost the interest and motivation to study the way of spirit runes. There was still no end to learning. In particular, the way of spirit runes, which was more inclined to the theoretical type, did not have enough time and energy to immerse himself in it. After all, it was just half-baked knowledge. Fortunately, he still had his master. Lu Yi decided to ask his master for guidance. Speaking of which, he had not paid a visit to his master on this trip, which was somewhat inappropriate. But when Lu Yi arrived at the bright moon peak, he found that the huge spirit peak was empty. Even his master's avatar, Xiao Dai, whom he could see every time he came here, was nowhere to be seen. It seemed that there had been no one here for a long time. He tried to send a message to his master, but the message could not be sent out. He could only send a message to his second senior sister to inquire about the situation. After receiving a reply from his second senior sister, Lu Yi knew that his master had been promoted to a constellation mansion and had left the 9 provinces more than 3 months ago to go deep into the starry sky. Not only had his master Yun Xuechu left, but even the sect leader had left with her. Therefore, when he returned this time, Lu Yi did not even see the sect leader. In the current Blue Blood sect, only Shui Yuan was still bitterly guarding it because she could not leave. If she left, the entire Blue Blood sect would be like a dragon without a head, and the disciples would inevitably lose their protection. When that time came, they would be like a sheet of loose sand. Of course, this was also because Shui Yuan's cultivation was not high enough. Although Shui Yuan had broken through to the Divine Sea realm a long time ago, her cultivation was still only at the 7th order Divine Sea realm. Lu Yi could not help but be dumbfounded. More than 3 months ago, he was competing with the geniuses of the various Alpha Origin realms. However, this was also a good thing. His master and sect leader had both stepped into a constellation mansion and were now exploring the starry sky together. They were both free and unfettered, but Lu Yi did not know if the sect leader could untie the knot in his master's heart. With his master gone, there was no one to guide him. Lu Yi thought about it and sent a message to Shui Yuan. asking her to help him inquire about the whereabouts of the famous spirit tattooists who were still in the 9 provinces. Since his master was not here, he could only look for other spirit tattooists to discuss. Perhaps these spirit tattooists who were still in the 9 provinces were not as good as him in terms of cultivation and strength, but Lu Yi would not underestimate them because of this. In the past, these spirit tattooists were able to become famous because they had their own strengths, and these strengths were what Lu Yi needed to learn. He did not leave Bright Moon Peak but plunged in. His master had left, but the books she left behind were still there. Lu Yi decided to recultivate the Tao of spirit tattoos before he was promoted to a constellation mansion. He would start with the books left behind by his master. Chapter 1281. There was no end to learning. The more Lu Yi immersed himself in the way of spiritual tattoos, the more he could feel the vastness and profoundness of it. In fact, every aspect of a practitioner's cultivation was inseparable from spiritual tattoos. But most of the time, even the practitioners themselves neglected this point. Undoubtedly, the influence of spiritual tattoos ran through every practitioner's life. There were a lot of books about spiritual tattoos on Mingyue Peak, which were all collected by Master throughout his life. Lu Yi had read many of them before, but at that time, his cultivation was low and his attainments in spiritual tattoos were not mature enough. Therefore, he just skimmed through many things without a deep understanding. Now, when he looked back, he had a different feeling. He could often get some new inspirations, which benefited him a lot. Days passed, and Lu Yi stayed on Mingyue Peak for 2 months. Until one day after 2 months, he walked out of Bright Moon Peak. Inexplicably, he felt as if a lifetime had passed. After 2 months of cultivation, Lu Yi could feel that he had made great progress in spiritual tattoos. But he was not in a hurry to deduce spiritual tattoos, because he faintly felt that he was still lacking. Even if he tried to deduce spiritual tattoos at this time, he was afraid that he would not get a good result. He came to guarding the peak and found second senior sister, who was refining elixirs with a calabash. If you want to cultivate spiritual tattoos, I suggest you go to Yuzhou. Seeing his arrival, Shui Yuan immediately understood his plan. Yuzhou. Lu Yi was puzzled. Shui Yuan said, there is a divine tattoo sect in Yuzhou, which occupies a treasured place. It has always been the holy land in the eyes of spiritual tattooists in 9 regions. However, because the divine rune sect belongs to the Myriad Devil Ridge, only the spirit rune masters of the Myriad Devil Ridge could cultivate in the sacred land. But now, the situation is different. The sacred land of the Divine Rune Sect is open to the Divine Sea Realm cultivators of the Grand Sky Alliance. If you want to go, the Divine Rune Sect will not refuse. Lu Yi really didn't know about it. Speaking of which, he didn't know much about 9 regions. After all, he was young and didn't spend enough time in 9 regions, so he knew little about the secrets of various sections. If it weren't for Shui Yuan's reminder, he really didn't know that there was a holy land of spiritual tattooists in 9 regions. You asked me to inquire about the whereabouts of those famous spiritual tattooists. Now there are many powerful spiritual tattooists gathering there to comprehend the way of spiritual tattoos. Hearing her words, Lu Yi immediately became interested. At present, he was thirsty for spiritual tattoos. Now that he knew there was a place where so many spiritual tattooists gathered, he naturally didn't want to miss it. He immediately bid farewell to Shui Yuan and set out on his journey. He went straight to the heavenly fortune hall of his sect and teleported to the serene continent with the help of the heavenly fortune pillar. He appeared in a Tianji business union less than 3,000 miles away from the Divine Rune Sect. This place was also the closest Tianji pillar to the Divine Rune Sect. Since Lu Yi was going to pay them a visit, he naturally couldn't directly descend on their main sect. Even though Lu Yi currently had the ability to do so, if he really did so, it wouldn't be a visit, but an invasion. Lu Yi took out the map of the Heavenly Secret Merchant Union, and after ascertaining the direction, he left the Heavenly Secret Merchant Union and soared into the skies, heading straight for the Divine Inscription Sect. In the past, the general trend of the 9 provinces was that the 2 camps were in constant conflict. They each had their own master and couldn't get along with each other. The entire Serene continent was under the control of the Myriad Devil Ridge. The Divine Rune sect was also a sect of the Myriad Devil Ridge. Naturally, the Divine Rune sect wouldn't open its sacred land to the people of the Haotian Alliance. It was just like how the 100 Formation Pagoda of the Sky Expanse sect in the Mist Province wouldn't open to the people of the Myriad Devil Ridge. However, after the insect disaster that swept through the 9 provinces and the magnificent expedition to the blood refinement world, the previous situation had been changed. Currently, the two camps couldn't be said to exist in name only, but the relationship between them had broken a lot. In particular, many large sects showed signs of cooperation in many aspects. Under such a general trend, the Divine Rune sect also opened its sacred land to the public and was willing to let the spiritual tattooists of the Haotian Alliance to comprehend and exchange knowledge. It was also a good karma. So now, spiritual tattooists from all over the 9 provinces gathered in the sacred land of the Divine Rune sect. If Lu Yi wanted to find a spiritual tattooist to discuss and exchange knowledge, going to the Divine Rune sect was the most time-saving method. It was definitely better than visiting them one by one. Shui Yuan also sensed his intention, so she gave him such advice. After a while, a vast mountain range appeared in front of Lu Yi. The grade of the Divine Rune sect wasn't low. According to Tianji's evaluation, it was a second-grade sect. There were many Divine Sea cultivators in the sect, so the foundation they occupied was naturally not small. Compared to the current Jade Blood sect, the scene in the Divine Rune sect was undoubtedly much livelier. There were many rare beasts in the mountain range, and there were pavilions and pavilions in the spiritual peaks. Cultivators shuttled back and forth. It was a beautiful scene of a flourishing sect. There would be a day when the Jade Blood sect would be so prosperous, but not now. Lu Yi didn't conceal his aura and went deeper inside. Along the way, he encountered disciples of the Divine Rune sect. After sensing Lu Ye's Divine Sea cultivator aura, they all bowed politely. However, Lu Ye's young age still surprised and envied these disciples. They all realized that he was probably a figure nurtured by a top sect. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to have such a deep cultivation at such a young age. Only after arriving at the entrance of the Divine Inscription sect did Lu Ye's silhouette descend. A disciple who was on duty respectfully greeted, "May I ask where fellow Taoist is from? What business do you have with my Divine Inscription sect?" The disciple's cultivation wasn't high, but it wasn't low either. He was a third-order true Lake Realm cultivator, which was also the face of a second-grade sect. Normally, when one saw a Divine Sea cultivator, one would have to call him senior, but Lu Yi was obviously young, so the disciple could only call him fellow Taoist. Lu Yi took out a letter he had prepared in advance and handed it over. "Please report that Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect is here to pay a visit." The disciple was only surprised by Lu Ye's young and promising appearance, but after hearing Lu Ye's name, he was obviously shocked. He couldn't help but look at Lu Yi carefully. Sure enough, he felt that Lu Yi was somewhat familiar. In the past, Lu Yi had stirred up trouble in the Spirit Stream battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield, causing the top sects of Myriad Demon Ridge to suffer. The Myriad Demon Ridge had even issued a bounty for him, saying that anyone who could kill Lu Yi would be rewarded handsomely. It was also during that time that Lu Ye's image had been circulating in the Myriad Demon Ridge camp for a while. The disciple had also seen Lu Ye's image, but now that several years had passed, Lu Ye's cultivation and aura had changed, so the disciple couldn't recognize him at a glance. But after hearing Lu Ye's name, he quickly reacted, "The Jade Blood sect of the War Province?" The disciple's expression turned solemn as he hurriedly said, "Please wait a moment, fellow Taoist, I will go and report this." If one were to talk about who was the most famous in the 9 continents, it would definitely not be the masters who had advanced to the Star Mansion realm, nor the veteran Divine Sea cultivators who had been famous for a long time, but Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect, who once had the title of Sect Exterminating Yi. Whether it was solving the insect plague or the expedition to the blood refining world, Lu Yi had played an indelible and irreplaceable role. The current prosperity of the 9 continents was also due to Lu Ye's great contribution. In the 9 continents, countless cultivators of the younger generation regarded him as a role model and a legend. How could the disciple dare to neglect such a character coming to pay a visit in person? Even the upper echelons of the Divine Runes sect didn't dare to neglect him. Therefore, not long after the disciple left, several figures flew out from the Divine Runes sect. Each of them had a powerful aura and were all in the Divine Sea realm. In the blink of an eye, they gathered at the gate of the sect. The leader of the group was an old man who welcomed them with a big smile. I was wondering why there were magpies playing on the branches today. It turns out that we have a distinguished guest. Fellow Taoist Lu has come from afar. My Divine Runes sect has neglected you. Please forgive us for our rudeness. Senior, you are too polite. We have disturbed you uninvited. Please forgive us. Originally, when they heard that Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect had come, these Divine Sea Realm cultivators of the Divine Runes sect were still a little worried. After all, he was young, promising, and famous. Perhaps some young people had the problem of being arrogant, but when they saw that Lu Yi was humble and polite, they were relieved and their attitude became more friendly. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Lu Yi found out that the Divine Sea Realm cultivator in the lead was called Pei Yuan, the current sect leader of the Divine Runes sect. Originally, he was only a vice sect leader, but the original sect leader had already ascended to the constellation realm and left the 9 continents, thus passing the position of sect leader to him. However, judging from his aura and background, he probably wouldn't be the sect leader for too long. Who knew when he would find an opportunity and ascend to the constellation realm? Right now, all the top sects in the 9 continents were facing a situation where the new and the old were replaced. To the entire cultivation world of the 9 continents, this was a good thing, but to the sects involved, there were many trivial matters that needed to be taken care of. Under the introduction of Pei Yuan, Lu Yi greeted the vice sect leader and the elders of the Divine Runes sect. Only then did they enter the sect in a lively manner. When they arrived at the guest hall, they sat for a while and chatted for a while. Then Lu Yi went straight to the point and pointed out his purpose for coming. Pei Yuan seemed to have expected this. I have long heard that fellow Taoist Lu has great attainments in the Tao of Spirit Runes. Now it seems that it is indeed so. Fellow Taoist Lu is really young and promising. Our sect's sacred ground is now open to all fellow Taoists in the 9 continents. If fellow Taoist Lu wants to go and observe, it is our sect's honor. Lu Yi said, let's go now. His purpose of coming here was to see the so-called sacred ground of Spirit Rune Masters. How could he be in the mood to chat with the people of the Divine Runes sect? Pei Yuan nodded, stood up and said, then fellow Taoist Lu, please follow me. Then he personally led Lu Yi out of the main hall and flew in a certain direction. On the way, Pei Yuan briefly introduced the situation of the sacred ground. Lu Yi only listened in silence. In fact, before coming here, he had already learned about the situation from Shui Yuan. However, since Pei Yuan had intentionally introduced the sacred ground, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't be ignorant. Not long after, they arrived in front of a cliff. The cliff was smooth and flat, as if it had been cut out by someone with supreme strength. Presumably, this was the so-called sacred ground. Chapter 1282. 300 feet above the cliff, there was a dark cave entrance. Pei Yuan led Lu Yi to this place and stopped. He pointed to the cave entrance and said, fellow Taoist Lu, from this cave entrance, you will see the Holy Land. Now there are many spiritual tattooists gathered here. Maybe more people will come here in the future. I hope you can gain something from it. Thank you, Sect Master Pei. Lu Yi thanked him. Pei Yuan was only responsible for leading Lu Yi to this place. He didn't intend to go deeper, so he quickly turned and left. After watching him leave, Lu Yi stepped into the cave entrance. The passage inside the cave was very spacious, enough to accommodate several people walking side by side. Through the perception of divine thought, Lu Yi could perceive that there were many vitality gathering in the depths of the cave. They must be the spiritual tattooists from all over the 9 regions who came to observe and cultivate. Lu Yi went straight inside. After walking for half a cup of tea's time, he vaguely heard someone talking in front of him. Listening carefully, it seemed that they were arguing about something. He continued to move forward. After a while, A huge karst cave appeared in front of him. There were spots of light all around, decorated with strange stones, so that the karst cave was not dark, but as bright as day. Looking around, there were quite a number of people gathered in the cave, at least 100. Some were gathered together, some were sitting cross-legged in front of the cave wall, observing with rapt attention, and some were sitting in pairs with a jade plate in front of them. Everyone was circulating their spirit force, as if they were competing with each other. All kinds of voices came into his ears, and it seemed very lively. Lu Yi didn't expect this place to be like this. Originally, he thought that the so-called Holy Land must be a quiet and peaceful place. Now he knew that he thought too much. He turned his head and looked around. He found that the inside of the karst cave was flat and smooth stone everywhere. Those stone surfaces were engraved with all kinds of complicated lines. If a cultivator who didn't know the Tao of spiritual tattoos saw it, he would be dizzy and confused. But for spiritual tattooists, these complicated lines contained great wisdom and were good things to be understood and observed. When Lu Yi walked in, there were some who noticed him. However, they only casually cast a few glances at him and didn't pay any more attention to him. Right now, there were many people entering and exiting the sacred grounds of the Divine Inscription sect. Lu Ye's youthful appearance naturally wouldn't attract any attention. Following the quarrel, Lu Yi came to a smooth stone wall. After listening silently for a moment, he figured out what was going on. Obviously, the spiritual tattooists gathered here had different understandings and opinions about the lines inscribed on the stone wall. One side believed that the lines were the embryonic form of a certain spiritual tattoo, while the other side believed that they were the embryonic form of another spiritual tattoo. Both sides had their own opinions and quarreled fiercely. Lu Yi took the opportunity to join in and express his opinion, but he was quickly drowned out by the spit of both sides. He had never experienced such a situation before. Facing a group of seniors who had been immersed in the Tao longer than him, Lu Yi did not want to argue too much with them, so he could only stand aside and watch. However, the two sides didn't quarrel for too long, because there was no fixed winner or loser in the dispute of the Tao of spiritual tattoo. Both sides had their own reasons, and no one was right. Then they could only fight to see who was the real winner. They didn't want to fight to the death like ordinary fights. Since they were all spiritual tattooists, what they competed with was naturally things in the Tao of spiritual tattoo. Based on the lines in dispute, each of them tried their best to deduce the spiritual tattoo. Whoever could deduce the most stable spiritual tattoo would be the winner. This was also the most tacit way of fighting among the spiritual tattooists gathered here. Lu Yi had never seen it before, so he felt it was quite novel. He silently integrated into it, took out a jade plate specially used by spiritual tattooists, and began to build the yin and yang on the jade plate with his spiritual force. The lines on the stone wall were incomplete. If a spiritual tattooist wanted to deduce a new spiritual tattoo with them, it would undoubtedly test the spiritual tattooist's skills. Lu Yi didn't know how the other spiritual tattooists were doing, but he was making good progress. Perhaps it was because of the characteristics brought by the second transformation of the talent tree. He always had many wonderful ideas that others couldn't reach when it came to deduce spiritual tattoos. An hour later, the jade plate in Lu Ye's hand flashed, and a spiritual tattoo was formed. This anomaly immediately attracted the attention of other spiritual tattooists who were working hard. They all looked over and were very surprised. No one expected that among so many people present, this seemingly youngest guy was the first one to produce results. They didn't need to deduce anymore. They all gathered around and passed Lu Ye's jade plate around, commenting from time to time. Although this newly deduced spiritual tattoo had some shortcomings, it was undeniable that it was indeed a formed spiritual tattoo, because it could exist stably on the jade plate. Of course, being able to exist stably and form didn't mean that it was useful. There were two kinds of spiritual tattoos. One was useful, which could play a role in fighting, cultivation, or other fields. The other was the one deduced by Lu Yi at this moment. It was a kind of useless spiritual tattoo. It could only exist, but it couldn't play any practical role. In fact, there were many such spiritual tattoos. Most of them were used by spiritual tattooists for research purposes. Basically, every spiritual tattooist could deduce many useless spiritual tattoos. Of course, uselessness and usefulness could often be interchanged. A useless spiritual tattoo might become a useful spiritual tattoo after some slight changes in the details. Similarly, those useful spiritual tattoos, if the arrangement of one or two yin and yang was changed, would become useless or even unable to take shape. After a round of comments, the two spiritual tattooists fell into a new round of quarrel. Both of them thought that the spiritual tattoo deduced by Lu Yi belonged to the field they recognized. Lu Yi found that these spiritual tattooists were all stubborn and didn't submit to anyone. If these guys died 100 years later, they might still have a mouth left. Amidst the commotion, everyone suddenly turned their gazes to Lu Yi, and a respected old man asked, "Little friend, you were the one who deduced this spirit rune, so tell us, what are the characteristics of this spirit rune?" Lu Yi looked embarrassed and stammered for a while, "I think what you said is quite reasonable." A group of people immediately glared at him. After all, the fence-sitters didn't have a good ending. Lu Yi was soon excluded from this circle, but he didn't care. He continued to walk to the side and observe other lines on the stone wall. There was no doubt that these lines were left by the powerful spiritual tattooists in the previous 9 provinces era. This place might have been the place where some spiritual tattooists practiced in seclusion. They carved some of their understandings on the stone wall, which had been passed down to the present day over the years. Latecomers came here to observe the legacy of their ancestors, get some inspiration, and then improve their own spiritual tattoos. In the long run, this place had become the holy land of spiritual tattooists. In fact, there was nothing special here. If a person who was not a spiritual tattooist came here, he or she would not get any practical benefits at all. But a real spiritual tattooist would scramble for such a treasure land like a flock of ducks. Moreover, those who were qualified to come here were all highly accomplished in spiritual tattoos. Those who were not accomplished enough would not be led here at all. In the first few days, those spiritual tattooists ignored Lu Yi because of his age. But as time went by, when Lu Yi gradually showed his attainments in spiritual tattoos, many spiritual tattooists really regarded him as a fellow practitioner. Lu Yi sometimes observed the lines on the stone wall by himself, sometimes discussed with other spiritual tattooists, and sometimes joined in some debates. In such a place, no one knew that he was Lu Ye of the Jade Blood Sect, and he didn't know the names of others. No matter men or women, old or young, they were all like-minded people who were striving for spiritual tattoos. They were real fellow practitioners. Such an atmosphere was an extremely rare experience for a spiritual tattooist. Compared with the closed-door cultivation, it was undoubtedly much more effective. The mutual discussion with each spiritual tattooist could benefit Lu Yi. In this way, he could get the advantages of all kinds of spiritual tattooists. Once again, Lu Yi forgot the passage of time and was completely immersed in it. Unconsciously, his attainments in spiritual tattoos were constantly improved. Under his purposeful arrangement, he almost had one-to-one in-depth exchanges with all the spiritual tattooists here. Many spiritual tattooists gradually realized his profound attainments in spiritual tattoos, and no one looked down upon him because of his age. In many cases, they even asked him to make a judgment when the dispute couldn't be resolved. Every time, it was quite difficult for Lu Yi, because no matter which side he stood on, the other side would not be convinced. In the end, they could only decide the winner in the way of spiritual tattooists. In a flash, 3 months had passed. On this day, 2 spiritual tattooists kept quarreling because of the lines on a stone wall. They couldn't reach a conclusion, so they decided to let Lu Yi be the judge. However, when they turned around, they found that Lu Yi was sitting on a stone wall motionlessly, as if he had fallen into a deep meditation. Don't disturb him. This little fellow practitioner has been meditating 3 days ago, and he seems to have comprehended something. Someone said, "Then let's keep our voices down. It's an opportunity to comprehend something here. Don't ruin his good fortune." All the people nodded. Lu Yi was meditating not because of comprehension, but because he was reviewing the loads on the leaves of the talent tree. The leaves of the talent tree carried not only the complete spiritual tattoos, but also the construction skills of spiritual tattoos and many understandings of the spiritual tattoos. Lu Yi didn't know where these understandings of the spiritual tattoos came from, just as he didn't know how those spiritual tattoos came to be. But there was no doubt that these understandings were rare treasures for any spiritual tattooist, which could help Lu Yi achieve higher achievements on the basis of these understandings. Chapter 1283. On the bright moon peak of the Jade Blood sect, Lu Yi read all the books about spiritual tattoos left by his master. During this period, he spent 2 months coming to the holy land of spiritual tattooists to observe the relics of the former 9 provinces era and to compete with many fellow practitioners for 3 months. After 5 months of painstaking cultivation, Lu Yi didn't know how much progress he had made in the way of spiritual tattoos, but it was still not enough. He could continue to study and absorb the information on the leaves of the talent tree. It was the same as when he read his master's books. In the past, when he obtained these books, he didn't have high attainments in the way of spiritual tattoos and just skimmed through them. He knew many things but didn't know why. Now, when he thought about it carefully, he gained something new. It was like eating a bowl of rice. In the past, Lu Yi would only feel that it was delicious after eating it. But now, when he ate the same bowl of rice again, he could distinguish what kind of ingredients were added in the bowl of rice and what kind of cooking method was used. 4 inches this way, if he needed, he could make this bowl of rice by himself. While recalling the information on the leaves of the talent tree, Lu Yi also sorted out what he had learned. Every time, there would be some unexpected surprises. So from this day on, there was one less spiritual tattooist participating in the competition in the Holy Land. Lu Yi sat in front of a smooth stone wall like a withered sculpture, silent and motionless. If it weren't for his long breath and vitality, others would really regard him as a dry and dead person. To underscore during this period, some new people joined and some left. In such a place, no one would restrict others from doing anything. Since it was the holy land of spiritual tattooists, as long as one was qualified enough, he or she could come and go freely. On this day, a group of spiritual tattooists finished a competition. An old man turned his head and glanced at him, sighing, "This little fellow practitioner has been in meditation for more than 2 months. I don't know what kind of enlightenment he has. It took him such a long time." It wasn't anything new to gain something here and then enter a state of enlightenment. Usually, under such circumstances, outsiders wouldn't rashly disturb them. However, no one had ever entered a state of meditation for such a long time. In the past, the longest period of meditation was less than 3 days. After all, the enlightenment in the way of spiritual tattoos was often a flash of inspiration. It didn't take a long time like cultivation. Who knows? We can only ask him when he wakes up. Just as they were talking, someone suddenly exclaimed, "He's awake, he's awake." Everyone looked up and saw Lu Yi, who had been sitting there motionless for the past 2 months, slowly stand up. Then, with the sound of a long sword being unsheathed, the mountain blade was unsheathed from his waist. One seeing this scene, everyone couldn't help but be shocked. Someone was stunned. What is he going to do? This was the holy land of spiritual tattooists. The stone walls were engraved with the relics of ancient sages. In such a place, it was not good to use weapons rashly. Therefore, no matter how noisy the spiritual tattooists were, no one would really fight in order to avoid destroying the stone walls here. If that happened, they would be sinners for all eternity. Therefore, when they saw Lu Yi take out his long saber, some people were on tenterhooks. They were afraid that this kid would be angry out of humiliation because he failed to comprehend the mystery of the spirit tattoos and wantonly destroy them. It was not impossible for this to happen. But soon, everyone realized that something was wrong, because the stone wall in front of Lu Yi was smooth and there were no ancient lines left. As Lu Yi jumped up and came to the front of the stone wall, with the spiritual force surging and the long saber dancing, everyone realized what he was going to do. Is he going to leave an inscription? Hearing this, all the spiritual tattooists gasped in astonishment. Leaving an inscription didn't mean leaving a name. No one would leave their name in such a holy land. However, if one had some novel ideas or deduced a new spirit tattoo that had never been seen in the world, he could leave an inscription here for future generations to admire and learn. The traces left on the stone walls in the Holy Land were not left in the same era. Some were extremely ancient, some were more recent, and some were obviously left in the past hundreds or thousands of years. These inscriptions were left by the spiritual tattooists who had meditated and cultivated here in the past. They were the displays of what they had learned. But without exception, those who were qualified to leave an inscription here, whether it was a formed spirit tattoo or not, must be able to withstand the test of future generations. It was not as simple as leaving an inscription by carving a few unknown lines on it. That would not get recognition, but only ridicule. The most recent inscription on the stone walls could be traced back to more than 300 years ago. At that time, a genius spiritual tattooist appeared and deduced a new spirit tattoo on the basis of the ancient people. Since then, no one was qualified to leave an inscription in such a holy land. But the inscription had been left as a legend until now. None of the spiritual tattooists here expected that in today's world, someone dared to leave an inscription here. Moreover, it was such a young man with a tender face. Wasn't he afraid of being laughed at? After all, once the lines were inscribed on the stone wall, they would be tested by all the spiritual tattooists present. Some of the mysteries in the lines could not be faked. The sound of cracking came out constantly, and the stone chips were flying. Lu Yi didn't notice the movements of other spiritual tattooists around him. But after more than half a year of painstaking pursuit on the path of spiritual tattoos, he suddenly had a strong feeling in his heart. That was, if he deduced a new sharpness spiritual tattoo at this time, there would probably be a surprise. Just do it. Instead of deducing a new sharpness spiritual tattoo on the leaves of the talent tree, he chose to inscribe it directly on the stone wall in front of him. This showed his strong confidence in his current state. When the Pan Mountain Saber danced on the stone wall and left crisscrossed lines, all the spiritual tattooists around were attracted and gathered behind him. No matter whether they were optimistic about his action or not, at least no one rashly disturbed him at this moment. They just waited quietly. Even if they wanted to criticize, they would wait until Lu Yi finished the work. Lu Yi didn't notice this. At this moment, he fell into a mysterious ethereal state, and all kinds of inspiration kept bursting out in his mind. This feeling was very similar to that of deducing a new sharpness spiritual tattoo with the help of the talent tree in Green Bamboo Peak more than half a year ago, but it was more intense. At that time, he always had an unsatisfactory feeling, as if he had the strength but couldn't exert it. It turned out that the new sharpness spiritual tattoo he deduced at the end was not very useful. But it was different this time. Lu Yi felt that he was in a better state this time. He knew that the reason why he couldn't exert it last time was that his understanding of the way of spiritual tattoos was not deep enough. But after more than half a year of cultivation, his attainments in the way of spiritual tattoos had been greatly improved. So, he could do his best and show all he had learned. Is he going to inscribe a complete spiritual tattoo? The spiritual tattooists who were watching from behind were gradually shocked. Originally, he thought that even if Lu Yi wanted to leave behind an inscription, he would only leave behind a unique pattern. If that was the case, then there would be a lot of room for criticism. This was because no one could be sure that such a pattern could really play a role in a spirit pattern. In fact, there were many such semi-finished lines on the stone wall, which had always been the focus of debate among the spiritual tattooists. But if he wanted to inscribe a complete spiritual tattoo, the result would be completely different. There was no room for criticism at all for a complete spiritual tattoo, because it was complete enough to play a role in it. Inscribing a complete spiritual tattoo in such a place was undoubtedly a brand new spiritual tattoo, which had never appeared in the history of cultivation in 9 provinces. There was no doubt that this was groundbreaking and would be recorded in the annals of history. Since ancient times, all kinds of spiritual tattoos in the cultivation world had been deduced by generations of extremely talented spiritual tattooists. The birth of every new spiritual tattoo was enough to shake the world of spiritual tattoos. There hadn't been a new spiritual tattoo in 9 provinces for many years. Was history going to happen in front of their eyes today? For a time, many spiritual tattooists were excited and paid closer attention to it. But as time went by, they gradually found something wrong. This spiritual tattoo is too complicated. Now there are nearly 1,000 foundational units, and it seems that it is not even half completed. If it is completely inscribed, it will cost at least 2,000 foundational units, right? For something like a spiritual tattoo, the more complicated it was, the better. On the contrary, the simpler the spiritual tattoo, the more popular it would be because it was simple enough and easy to construct. In this way, it could play a role in battles or other fields. But if it was too complicated, it would be difficult to construct and naturally could not be popularized. Take forging a spirit artifact as an example. When forging a spirit artifact, one would need to inscribe spirit inscriptions inside the spirit artifact to form a restriction. Even the most outstanding weapon refiner would not be willing to inscribe too complicated spirit inscriptions inside the spirit artifact because that would increase the chances of failure. Such a spiritual tattoo with at least 2,000 foundational units could not be used in weaponsmithing at all, because the requirement for weaponsmiths was too high. Inscribing such a spiritual tattoo as a restriction could already inscribe 5 or 6 normal spiritual tattoos. The price-performance ratio was too low. Such a complicated spiritual tattoo was usually used in setting up a formation, and it was the kind of formation that was set up in advance, because there would be plenty of time to prepare in advance and allow for mistakes. Gradually, the number of foundational units on the stone wall exceeded 2,000, which confirmed the previous spiritual tattooist's inference. After a while, Lu Yi suddenly put away his knife. As the last stone chips fell, a complete spiritual tattoo appeared in front of everyone's eyes. It contained a total of 2,046 foundational units, and the overall shape of the spiritual tattoo looked like an unsheathed long knife at first glance. In fact, if someone who didn't know the Tao of spiritual tattoos came here to look, they would only see a picture of a long saber carved on the stone wall. However, that long saber was made up of more than 2,000 basic elements. A sharp aura surged out from the stone wall. Chapter 1284. A spiritual tattoo that had never appeared in 9 regions appeared in front of the eyes of many spiritual tattooists, which made them dazzled and intoxicated. They were all people who had been immersed in the way of spiritual tattoos for many years. Naturally, they could see something about the overall coordination. There was no big problem with this spiritual tattoo, but whether it could be formed stably, whether it could play its own unique role, and what kind of role it would play still needed to be carefully verified. It was not really a new spiritual tattoo just because it was engraved on the stone wall. No one asked, and they would only believe in their own judgment. Therefore, many spiritual tattooists sat cross-legged, took out their own jade plates, and began to carefully construct on the jade plates according to the spiritual tattoo in the shape of the long saber. But how could a spiritual tattoo formed by the precise combination of more than 2,000 basic elements be constructed so casually? Even these spiritual tattooists had to experience many failures, and practice makes perfect before they could slowly form it. It would take at least half a month or even longer, which was a matter for the future. Lu Yi quietly left the crowd and went straight to the back of the crowd. He stood in front of a plump woman in a floral dress and stared at her with a smile. The woman looked very uncomfortable, but she pretended to be calm. "Little friend, what's the matter?" Lu Yi untied the Panshan saber from his waist, held it with one hand, and handed it over. The woman looked at the Panshan saber, then looked up at him and sighed slightly. "Let's go out and talk." In the end, she couldn't avoid it. A group of spiritual tattooists were left in front of the stone wall to explore and verify. Lu Yi led the way, followed by the woman in the floral dress, and left the holy land of spiritual tattooists through the passage. After finding a secluded place nearby, Lu Yi stopped, turned around, and looked at the woman. "Master Yu, we finally meet." Although she had guessed it, when Lu Yi called out the name of Master Yu, the woman couldn't help but have a headache. She really couldn't figure out how she was exposed. She recognized Lu Yi as soon as she arrived at the Holy Land. Not because she recognized Lu Yi, but because she recognized Lu Ye's mountain blade. No matter what, this long blade had been upgraded by her several times, so she was very familiar with this long blade. It was also at this time that Grandmaster Yu found out that the person who had been relying on the Heaven's secret treasury to upgrade his weapon was actually Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect. However, the few times they had met, they had all been in the Tianji treasure vault. With the Tianji treasure vault concealing them, she had also deliberately changed her voice, so there was no reason for anyone to recognize her. However, she did not know that as early as when Lu Yi had just advanced to Cloud River Realm, he had already been blessed by the heavens. She thought that she was concealing herself, but in front of Lu Yi, she was completely defenseless. Her voice and appearance had long been exposed under Lu Ye's eyes. When they entered the sacred land, Master Yu recognized his mountain pan blade. How could he not recognize Master Yu? It was just that he didn't point it out immediately. It was about time for the Pan Mountain Saber to be reforged. Lu Yi had originally planned to let Ouyang Zi reforge it. After all, in the current 9 continents, he was the one with the highest refining standards. It was a pity that Ouyang Zi had also advanced to the constellation realm and left the 9 continents without any news. Lu Yi had previously thought of doing it himself. In any case, the reforging this time wasn't something too complicated. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. The main reason was that he didn't have any suitable tools on hand, nor did he have a suitable environment for refining tools. If he really did it himself, it would be quite troublesome. Since he had met Master Yu here, then he wouldn't bother the two of them. He would do it himself. Strictly speaking, this was not the first time the two of them had met. However, if he were to really examine it closely, this was indeed the first time they had met. Lu Yi wasn't sure what Master Yu's real name was, but thinking about it, such a charming woman couldn't really be called Master Yu. However, there was no need to get to the bottom of things when cultivators interacted. How did you recognize me? Master Yu was extremely puzzled. For those who have been blessed by the heavens, the concealment of the Tianji treasure vault is useless, Lu Yi answered honestly. Master Yu had a helpless expression. So it turned out that he had already exposed his true identity in front of her. To think that every time he met Lu Yi in the Tianji treasure vault, he deliberately used an old voice. It's going to be upgraded again? Master Yu asked. Lu Yi said, there's no need for it to be upgraded. This time, it's to be reforged. As she spoke, she casually tossed the mountain pandao over and stated her request. Master Yu pulled out the mountain pandao. Her beautiful face immediately darkened. She raised her head and glared at Lu Yi. For you weapon cultivators, your weapon is your second life. You should cherish it and protect it. How did it end up like this? She put on an angry posture, as if the mountain pandao was her own. Lu Yi scratched her chin. I also want to cherish it and protect it. However, I always encounter some powerful enemies. I just keep hacking and it ended up like this. It was true that a weapon cultivator's second life was a weapon cultivator's, but they couldn't just abandon their weapons in the face of enemies. Things like Boulder were simply too hard. Lu Yi couldn't be blamed for this. Master Yu clearly knew this as well, so she didn't say anything more. She only said, as you requested, you'll need to add in some precious minerals. Moreover, you'll also need minerals of a specific nature. Lu Yi directly took out the short end and a portion of the black sand that she had left behind. She handed one to Master Yu. Can you use these 2 items? Master Yu received them and carefully inspected them for a moment. She was slightly moved. The quality of these 2 items is extremely high. Especially this black sand, I've never seen it before. It's naturally suitable for reforging. She didn't ask Lu Yi where these items came from. Of these 2 items, one was clearly a completed spirit artifact, and the other was something similar to a rare treasure. Master Yu didn't need to ask to know that these were spoils of war. As for which 2 unlucky bastards had encountered this sect exterminating leaf, she couldn't be bothered to find out. How long will it take? About a month. Master Yu calculated for a moment. Lu Yi nodded. Then I'll contact you after a month. The time was about right. After a month, he should be promoted to a constellation. I have a condition. Master Yu said. Speak. You're not allowed to tell anyone that I know how to refine weapons. Master Yu looked at Lu Yi with a serious expression. Lu Yi said curiously, refining weapons isn't something shameful. Why do you have to hide it? Master Yu sighed. You don't understand, so there's no need to ask. Anyway, in this world, other than you, no one else knows that I know how to refine weapons. Everyone had their own secrets. Since Qin Shi had said so, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't get to the bottom of it, so he nodded and said, Don't worry, only the heavens and the earth know about this. Only you and I know about this, and no one else will know about it. There's one more thing. I want to know what's the use of the spirit inscription you left on the stone wall. If Lu Yi didn't specially look for her, she would be constructing the complex spirit inscription in front of the stone wall like the other spirit inscriptionists and exploring the mystery within. However, since Lu Yi was in front of her, it was undoubtedly better to ask directly. That spirit inscription. I'll call it Divine Edge for now. Divine Edge? Master Yu frowned. It can be regarded as the advancement of the sharpness spirit inscription. It can exert a stronger lethality than the sharpness spirit inscription. Master Yu pondered for a while and commented, if so, it's a little flashy. Whether it's in fighting, refining weapons, or other aspects, it's very difficult to use this divine edge. Her comment hit the nail on the head. The divine edge might be able to exert a stronger lethality than the sharpness spirit inscription, but its drawback was also very obvious. It was too complicated. The formation of more than 2,000 basic elements was destined to make it unable to play any role in a battle. In a life-and-death battle, the situation was constantly changing. Who would have the energy and time to construct such a complicated spirit inscription? If they really did so, they would probably have a life-and-death battle before the spirit inscription was successfully constructed. Li smiled. That's true. The Divine Edge spirit inscription wasn't perfect. Because of its overly complicated characteristics, it was very difficult to use. However, Lu Yi didn't deduce this spirit inscription for popularizing it. He just wanted to use it for himself. No matter how complicated the spirit inscription was, with the help of the talent tree, he could construct it at will. Moreover, with the current foundation, as his strength and cultivation increased in the future and his attainments in the path of spirit inscriptions deepened, there might be a chance for him to optimize this spirit inscription and make it popular. Of course, this would probably take a long time before he had the ability to do so. Master Yu said, but no matter what, being able to deduce a new spirit inscription is enough for you, Lu Yi, to leave your name in the annals of the 9 provinces. As expected, the younger generation will surpass us in time. Master, you're not that old, right? Lu Yi looked at her. Master Yu obviously didn't want to discuss about her age. She turned around and said, if that's the case, you can come and get the saber when the time comes. She then flew out and didn't mention to Lu Yi how much she wanted to receive. After she left, Lu Yi sat down cross-legged. The divine edge had been deduced and engraved on the stone wall of the sacred ground. However, Lu Yi still had one more thing to do. That was to engrave the divine edge on the leaf of the talent tree. With this, when he faced enemies in the future, he would be able to activate this spirit inscription as he pleased to strengthen the mountain pan saber and increase its lethality. This wasn't difficult, especially under the premise that he had already engraved it once. It only took Lu Yi slightly more than 2 hours to complete the engraving of the divine edge. On the leaf of the talent tree that was burning fiercely, there was a new spirit inscription. Moreover, this new spirit inscription was undoubtedly of great significance to Lu Yi. Strictly speaking, this was the first time he had deduced a spirit inscription on his own. The void spirit inscriptions from before couldn't be counted as he had learned about void spirit inscriptions from books long ago. With the help of the talent tree's deduction, he had only made some improvements in the details of the spirit inscriptions. However, the divine edge had truly been created from nothing. It might not be perfect and was indeed complicated, but it was like Lu Yi's first child. Lu Yi had great expectations for it. With this successful experience, if he wanted to deduce new spirit inscriptions in the future, he would definitely be able to avoid many detours. Most importantly, Lu Yi felt that the divine edge still had room for simplification and improvement. However, this required him to continue to improve his attainments in the path of spirit inscriptions. This matter couldn't be rushed. End of this chapter. Chapter 1285. On the Wushuang continent, a large number of cultivators above the 9 prefectures' true lake stage poured in, causing this originally lifeless region to become extraordinarily lively. The current situation of the 9 prefectures was very clear. The Spirit Stream stage cultivators had fun in the Spirit Stream battlefield. The Cloud River stage cultivators had the Cloud River battlefield for them to vent their energy and compete with each other, and the True Lake stage cultivators could head to the Wushuang continent to kill the corpse race and obtain military merits to cultivate. It had already been a year since the passage between the two worlds opened. Within this 1 year, the number of True Lake stage cultivators that came from the 9 continents to the Wushuang continent was at least in the hundreds of thousands. As time passed, this number would only continue to grow. Thanks to Wuxian's painstaking arrangement, the 9 prefectures' cultivators used the formation to teleport to the Wushuang continent did not consume much of the 9 prefectures' foundation. What was consumed was only the energy accumulated by the transfer formations on the desolate stars. This was not Wuxian's kindness, but he had his eyes on the 9 prefectures and wanted to occupy this rapidly growing region. Naturally, he would not do anything that would damage the region's foundation. Unfortunately, his arrangement was thorough, and in the end, it only benefited the 9 prefectures' cultivators, while he was killed by Yang Qing. Currently, on the Wushuang continent, with the formation left behind by Wuxian as the center, the 9 prefectures' cultivators had already explored hundreds of thousands of miles. Such an area was already not small, but compared to the size of the entire Wushuang continent, it was only the tip of the iceberg. The Wushuang continent was also extremely vast, and its complete size was not much different from the 9 prefectures. It could be foreseen that the existence of the Wushuang continent would cause the 9 prefectures' cultivators to suffer for many years. Before the corpse race on the Wushuang continent was exterminated, the 9 prefectures' cultivators did not have to worry about obtaining military merits. As for what would happen after that, who could say for sure what would happen after hundreds of years? Perhaps by then, there would be some unexpected changes in the 9 prefectures' situation. There would finally be a place where cultivators could obtain military merits. In a mountain valley, an intense battle was going on. A burly figure that was like an iron tower stood on the spot like a small mountain. No matter how fierce the attacks were, it was difficult to shake the sturdy defensive line built by this body. The bare-chested giant armor exerted force under his feet. His entire body seemed to be nailed to the ground, and he did not move an inch as he blocked wave after wave of corpse race's fierce attacks. Beside him, Xiao Xinghe's long saber slashed the corpse race into halves one after another. Corpse blood splattered everywhere. On the other side, Li Baxian's flying swords were flying back and forth. The resplendent sword light was wreaking havoc among the zombies. There was also Feng Yuechan and Yi's magical techniques, which were dazzling. Within the horde of corpses, there was a petite figure that appeared from time to time, harvesting to her heart's content. It was Lin Yinxiu. When the tiger's roar shook the heavens, Hu Po's imposing aura leaped back and forth. Wherever the tiger's claws landed, there would definitely be corpses that would lose their lives. The change in the structure of the 9 regions also impacted the law division of the Force province. At present, the law division only existed in name. Even the head of the law division, Qian Wudong, had been promoted to a constellation and left the 9 regions. However, the configuration of each team still remained. Team D9 was one of them. Normally, they would hunt the corpse race on the Wushuang continent to obtain battle merits. Only when they encountered a large group of corpse race would they regroup and work together to kill the enemy. The scale of this zombie horde was not small, and it was precisely the prey that Team D9 liked. A few days ago, Lin Yinxiu had discovered traces of this zombie horde, and had sent a message to gather all the team members scattered around. What followed after was this kind of battle. Now, all the members of Team D9 were in the Divine Sea realm. Although their levels were not very high, with the help of the twin chi-connected spirit array, they could still exert strength beyond their own level. The battle had begun before dawn. Until now, the size of the corpse race had only been reduced by half. Third senior brother, I think we should retreat first. In the fierce battle, Li Baxian shouted loudly. Xiao Xinghe also had the same feeling. It was not that Team D9 was weak, or that the corpse race was too strong. Although there were many powerful corpse race members in the corpse race, who were even stronger than them individually, because of their low intelligence, it was not too difficult to deal with them. The key was that when fighting against the corpse race, they had to constantly channel their spiritual energy to resist the invasion of the corpse poison. Moreover, they had to be very careful not to get injured. Otherwise, once the corpse poison invaded, it would become very troublesome. This would undoubtedly consume a lot of spiritual energy for every cultivator. After dealing with half of the corpse race in one go, after resting and reorganizing, they could come back and deal with the other half. This was also the most suitable response. Just as he was about to respond, Xiao Xinghe suddenly felt something. He raised his head and looked in a direction, only to see a stream of light rushing towards them with a panicked aura. Xiao Xinghe's face lit up because he felt a sense of familiarity from the aura of this person. Hu Po's howl also became more and more excited. Even Yi showed a look of joy. The flowing light quickly rushed forward, and then a saber light slashed down like a waterfall. The few strongest members of the corpse clan were instantly split into two halves, greatly reducing the pressure on the defense line built by the giant armor. Everyone in Team D9 looked up and saw Lu Yi looking at them with a smile. Everyone, is there anything you need help with? Li Baxian smiled. Little junior brother, don't do anything. These are all battle achievements. Retreat first. Xiao Xinghe raised his arm and called out. Hu Po was the first to turn around and rush out of the battlefield. Before he left, he rushed to Yi and Feng Yuechan's side, biting them one by one and throwing them onto his back. Lin Yinxiu's figure disappeared. Only the faint ripples in the air showed the traces of her movement. After reaching Divine Sea, Ghost Cultivator's methods became more and more mysterious and unpredictable. Li Baxian shot out a river of sword qi and flew away. Xiao Xinghe also retreated bravely. In the end, he was left with the giant armor. After blocking the attacks of the zombies for a while, he turned around and allowed the attacks to land on his strong back. With loud bangs, he ran far away like a puff of smoke. A moment later, in a wilderness 100 li away from the battlefield, the members of Team J gathered. He jumped into Lu Ye's embrace with joy. Hu Po also turned into the size of a cat and jumped onto his shoulder, rubbing his head against his cheek. Li Baxian clicked his tongue in wonder. After not seeing you for a year, little junior brother's strength has become even more profound. When Lu Yi came over just now, his spirit energy fluctuations had already reached the 9th order Divine Sea realm. He was only one step away from breaking through to Star Mansion. This kind of cultivation speed was really enviable. Back then, he and Feng Yuechan's cultivation was much higher than Lu Ye's. Xiao Xinghe's cultivation was even higher, but now, Lu Yi had left them far behind. Compared to other cultivators, these people present were all extremely talented. All of them were peerless talents, but compared to Lu Yi, they all paled in comparison. There was no resentment or jealousy. The faster Lu Yi grew and the higher he stood, the happier they were. Everyone had their own opportunities. Everyone had to compare themselves to not others on the road of growth, but themselves. Only by constantly surpassing themselves could they become stronger and walk further. For people like them, this was something they could still understand. Are you going to advance to Star Mansion? Xiao Xinghe looked Lu Yi up and down. Lu Yi rubbed Yi's little head and smiled slightly. Within a month. It was precisely because he was about to advance to Star Mansion that he deliberately came to the Peerless Continent to look for his friends. Because once he advanced to Star Mansion, he would have to leave the 9 states and go deep into the starry sky. At that time, it would not be so easy to meet with his old friends. At the very least, before leaving the 9 states, he wanted to say goodbye to these few friends and relatives. That's fast. Xiao Xinghe could not help but be a little surprised. Shoo. Lin Yinxiu was still as carefree as ever. She greeted Lu Yi enthusiastically, "Captain." Zhu Jia was also the same as before. He just smiled at Lu Yi. After chatting for a while, Lu Yi winked at Li Baxian. "I brought good wine." Li Baxian licked his lips and could not help but glance at Feng Yuechan. Against his will, he said, "Senior brother, I've quit." Feng Yuechan could not help but roll her eyes. "It's okay to drink less." Li Baxian was overjoyed. Thus, the group sat down in a circle. Lu Yi took out the good wine and fruits he brought and placed them on the table. Everyone drank and chatted, as if they had returned to the carefree time when their cultivation was still low. Everyone talked about their experiences on the peerless continent in recent years. Lu Yi talked about how Yang Qing had brought him to the reincarnation tree to compete in the Alpha Origin stage, which made everyone yearn for it. Unfortunately, the Alpha Origin stage only opened once every 100 years, and there was only one spot for each domain. No matter what, it would not be their turn. The meal lasted from dusk to dawn, and from dawn to dusk. When the last drop of wine was drunk, Xiao Xinghe stood up and said with a smile, "Junior brother, I'll go first. There's still a long way to go. We will meet again in the starry sky in the future." He stretched out his hand and placed it across the air. Everyone got up and placed their hands on his. Lu Yi said, "Then I'll go scout the way first and wait for senior brothers and sisters to arrive." It was difficult to meet and difficult to part, but there was no such thing as a parting. Team D9 still had to deal with the remaining half of the zombie horde, and Lu Yi still had to find traces of another person. He did not show much reluctance this time. Even Hoopa seemed to be free and easy as he left with it. The Spirit and Tiger both knew that if they wanted to fight side by side with Lu Yi again, they would have to work hard in their cultivation. Even if they could not catch up to him, they could not be left too far behind. Otherwise, it would be difficult for them to cross paths in the future. He and Hoopa had already realized this a long time ago. As the gap between their cultivation bases gradually widened, they were destined to face different situations. However, they both believed that this situation was only temporary. As long as they worked hard enough, there would be a day when they could stand by Lu Ye's side and fight against powerful enemies together. As the sun rose from the east, Lu Yi gazed at the figures waving their arms with their backs facing him, and much of the worry and reluctance in his heart disappeared. If Yi and Hoopa had such resolve, there was no reason why he couldn't. After bidding farewell to Team D9, there was only one person left. The question now was, where should he find her? Chapter 1286. Sending a message directly was a good idea. Nowadays, there were already some Heaven's Fate pillars set up all over the peerless continent. Cultivators could use them as hubs to communicate with each other. This was also the reason why the 9 teams could quickly assemble after fighting their own battles. However, Lu Yi didn't plan to send a message. After not seeing each other for so long, he had to give her a surprise. It wasn't that there was no way to find her, because he had contacted her before and knew the approximate location. Lu Yi decided to look for it himself first. If he really couldn't find her, it wouldn't be too late to send a message. Following the direction Yi had pointed out, Lu Yi leaped up and flew at a low altitude. Along the way, he encountered some 9 states cultivators from time to time. Although there were many Spirit Sea Realm cultivators active on the peerless continent, it was rare to see cultivators above the 7th Order Spirit Sea Realm. This was because cultivators at this level had accumulated enough merit in the previous insect plague and the expedition to the blood refining world. Their main goal now was to constantly improve their cultivation and strive to take that step as soon as possible. Basically, cultivators above this level stayed in the 9 states to cultivate. Only cultivators with insufficient cultivation and merit would come to the peerless continent to fish for benefits. Therefore, after sensing Lu Ye's 9th Order Spirit Sea Realm aura from afar, the cultivators of the 9 states didn't feel any sense of familiarity. Instead, they quickly distanced themselves, subconsciously thinking that he was here to snatch the job. Lu Yi didn't care. One of the problems with flying at a low altitude was that it was easy to alarm the hibernating corpse race. However, Lu Yi generally just passed by and didn't plan to attack. Just as fourth senior brother Li Baxian said, these corpse race cultivators were all merit points. For the cultivators of 9 regions, this was a meritorious service. The more he killed, the less the other cultivators would kill. This thing called meritorious service was no longer of any use to him, so there was no need to compete with others. Flying like this for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, in the beginning, he could often see traces of cultivators, but the further he went, the harder it was to see living people. Lu Yi knew that he had probably walked out of the active range of the 9 states cultivators. However, there was still no trace of that woman. The direction was correct. He had specifically pointed out this direction before. If he still couldn't find her, then either he had missed her or she was in a deeper location. Lu Yi was inclined towards the latter possibility. It was not because he felt that Wuxia was very strong, but because this woman's cultivation method was different from ordinary cultivators. She didn't have much desire for battle achievements, because spiritual stones and spiritual pills weren't the most important means of cultivation, let alone the method of guiding the mysteries of heaven. She liked to cultivate in places with highly toxic substances. Corpse poison was also poison, so the overall environment of the Wuxia continent was quite suitable for Wuxia. Since that was the case, she would definitely choose a place with fewer people. This was also the reason why she didn't come over when Team D9 was gathering. She wouldn't get any practical benefits from killing corpses. If he wanted to be sparsely populated, he would have to go deeper than others. Although she was a delicate woman, she was actually more courageous than anyone else. Moreover, she was able to endure the loneliness of cultivating alone. The Spirit Stream Battlefield's 10,000 Poisons Forest and the Cloud River Battlefield's 5 Poisons Pond were forbidden lands that ordinary cultivators wouldn't dare to enter. However, they were her favorite places. He continued forward and flew for another few 100,000 miles, but still found nothing. Lu Yi felt that he would not be able to find her with his own ability. Sighing slightly, he could only send a message to inquire. Just as he was about to do so, his gaze looked in another direction. That location seemed to be different from other places. Although the other places on the Wuxia continent were barren and desolate, and corpses ran rampant, there was absolutely no sign of such dense corpse clouds gathering. Lu Ye's mind moved, and he flew in that direction. The closer he got, the more he could feel the density of the corpse clouds. This should be a very large valley. Dark green corpse clouds gathered in the valley. Even if there was a fierce wind, it wouldn't disperse. There should be a lot of corpses gathered here. Otherwise, it would be impossible to gather such a scale of corpse clouds. Such a dangerous place, even if Team D9 came, they would probably shake their heads. They wouldn't be able to go deep, let alone fish for battle achievements. Lu Yi was originally just curious, but when his divine sense penetrated the corpse clouds and swept over the situation in the valley, his eyes couldn't help but light up, and he revealed a smile. This was really traveling far and wide in search of something, only to find it without any effort. He was wondering why such a dense corpse cloud gathered in this place. It turned out that it wasn't naturally formed, but man-made traces. After crossing nearly 1,000,000 miles, he finally found such a place. There was no prior communication between them, so Lu Yi didn't know if this could be considered a tacit understanding. Descending straight into the valley, Lu Yi broke into the corpse clouds. In sight. The next moment, Lu Yi felt an abnormal movement in his talent tree. Looking at it with rapt attention, he saw a large amount of gray mist appear. And very poisonous. Immediately pushing his spirit chi to isolate himself, Lu Ye's talent tree finally stopped responding. Landing in the valley, Lu Yi looked down and saw that there were bright red mushrooms all around him. At first glance, it was obvious they were highly poisonous. Because of the corpse clouds, Lu Yi couldn't see too far, but he felt that this entire valley was filled with these poisonous mushrooms. This was undoubtedly a unique method of that woman, but what made Lu Yi a little curious was that he didn't sense it. He was aware of the other party's aura. One had to know that with his current 9th order divine sea cultivation, his divine sense was extremely powerful, and his perception was extremely keen. Lu Yi wasn't in a hurry to search for her. Since he had already arrived, he would definitely be able to find her. Driven by curiosity, Lu Yi bent down, pinched a mushroom at his feet, and plucked it slightly. It didn't budge. This was quite outrageous. Mushrooms grew on the ground and generally didn't have a very developed root system, so they could be picked at will. But at this moment, Lu Yi felt that this mushroom seemed to be growing on something and was closely connected to it. Using a little more strength, Lu Yi finally managed to pull it out. But as the mushroom was pulled out, a rotten smell wafted into Lu Ye's nose, followed by a head full of rotten flesh that looked like a radish being pulled out of the ground. Half of the head's face was missing, revealing only a few pieces of flesh. Only one of the head's eyes was intact, the other half hanging under its eyelid. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment and stared at the head for a while. Suddenly, the other party's eyes moved stiffly and its turbid eyes stared straight at Lu Yi. Lu Yi hesitated for a moment before exerting a little more strength in his hand, and before the other party could roar, he pushed it back into the ground and stomped on the ground a few times, solidifying the soil around the mushroom. Asterisk roar. Asterisk when the roar came out, the tranquility of the valley was broken. Then the corpse clouds rolled, and the mushrooms moved. With a rustling sound, the figures of the corpse clan jumped out from the ground. Basically, they were all rotten corpses. Some were missing arms, some were missing legs, some had their stomachs cut open, and some were missing half of their heads. Each and every one of them was unique. If this scene was called timid, if someone saw it, they would probably lose 2 of their 3 souls first. However, without exception, these corpse clan members all had an incomparably bright mushroom on their heads. It was the same ones that Lu Yi had seen before. Only now did he realize that the number of mushrooms he had seen before was how many corpse clan members were hidden underground. It wasn't that he wasn't careful enough, but these corpse clan members didn't reveal the slightest bit of their aura when they were hibernating. If Lu Yi hadn't pulled out a corpse clan member when he was pulling out the mushroom, he wouldn't have known that there were such methods underground. He simply thought that someone was using the corpse clouds here to cultivate their own mushrooms. Now it seemed that these mushrooms were probably a method to control these corpse clan members. Otherwise, there was no reason for one to be planted on each corpse clan member's head. The corpse clan members bared their fangs and brandished their claws arrogantly. They slowly approached Lu Yi, giving him a sense of oppression. Lu Yi stood there carelessly and shouted with an exaggerated expression, "Help! Someone wants to murder her husband." A soft snort came from the side with a trace of disdain. "What nonsense are you talking about? Who's your husband?" Lu Yi looked in the direction of the voice and saw a woman in a long green dress standing there with a faint smile. Amidst the baring fangs and brandishing claws of countless corpse race members, it was a different kind of scenery. For eyes met, and Wuxia said, "Fortunately, there's no one here, or else your reputation would be ruined by you." "What do you want reputation for?" Lu Yi was surprised. "I have to get married." Wuxia blinked, looking somewhat provocative. Lu Yi gave a meaningful "oh" and nodded. "When you get married one day, let me know. I'll definitely prepare a big gift for you." Wuxia smiled gently. "Okay, when the time comes, you'll be the first to know." Although they hadn't seen each other for a long time, Lu Yi didn't feel any sense of unfamiliarity. After bickering for a while, Lu Yi smiled and said, "I'm afraid no man can stand the way you're acting like a corpse. That's none of your business." Wuxia curled her lips. Lu Yi laughed loudly and stepped forward, opening his arms to give her a hug. Wuxia gently raised a finger and tapped his forehead, stopping his movements, a vigilant look on her face. "You want to take advantage of me as soon as you get here? Do you think I'm still as ignorant as before?" Lu Yi was helpless, unable to take advantage of her, and said with a frown, "You've changed." Wuxia said with a smile, "The next time you see me, you'll change even more." When Lu Yi thought of that scene, he scratched his head and simply changed the topic. "You've been here all this time? And how did you find me?" He pointed me in a direction, so I just looked around and found this place. "What are you doing here?" "Raising corpses." Wuxia smiled slightly. "Look at these little things, they're so cute." Lu Yi turned his head to look at the many corpse clan members on the side and really didn't find anything cute about them, but he roughly understood that Hua Ci was raising corpses here because she was using the corpse clan's corpse poison to cultivate. This was also a cultivation method that belonged to her alone, and others couldn't imitate it. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.